On Valentine's Day in Tijuana, Elizabeth was excited about a second date with a man she had recently met. As usual, she let her family know where she was going, even shared her location for safety. Initially, everything seemed fine. However, her messages suddenly stopped. Her phone went quiet, and her car was missing. By the next morning, her family began searching everywhere for her, hoping to find any clue. What they uncovered shattered their hearts and revealed a more disturbing situation in the city. Elizabeth was not alone. Her case was just the start of a troubling pattern. Elizabeth Martínez was born in 1996 in Tijuana, Baja California, a city on the border between Mexico and the United States. She was the youngest of 7 siblings. People who knew her described Elizabeth as a cheerful and gentle young woman who had a strong bond with her mother. Her mother was more than just a mother to her. She was her anchor, confidant, and main source of strength. By early 2022, Elizabeth accomplished something her family had never achieved before. She graduated with a degree in international trade and business from a private university. This was a significant milestone, but it didn't satisfy her ambitions. She aspired to pursue a master's degree to create more opportunities for herself and her family. While planning her educational journey, Elizabeth also managed a small clothing business. To boost her income, she worked as a dancer in a bar located in Zona Norte, a popular nightlife area for both tourists and locals. Like many women in her situation, Elizabeth was careful. She kept her family updated, especially when meeting clients. She shared her location, maintained communication, and trusted her instincts. This cautious habit would later play a crucial role in the effort to track her last movements. On February 14, 2022, Valentine's Day, Elizabeth seemed excited. She had lunch with her mother that afternoon, which turned out to be their last meal together. Later that evening, she had a second date with a man she had recently met at work. He was American. Elizabeth confided in her brother, expressing that while she was uncertain about him, her curiosity led her to give him another chance. Staying true to her usual habits, she promised to keep in touch, send updates, and share her location. Some reports indicate they met again at a bar, while others suggest she picked him up near a border crossing in her white SUV. They went to a Brazilian restaurant for dinner and then drove to a motel close to the beaches of Tijuana. Elizabeth informed her family that she would be gone for no more than 4 hours. At the start of the night, everything appeared normal. She kept sending her location, and her messages reassured her family about her safety. They knew where she was and who she was with. However, then the updates suddenly stopped. There were no more messages, no answered calls, and no signs that she was moving. This silence was not just worrisome, it was overwhelming. Her family's anxiety grew rapidly. The lack of communication was completely out of character for someone as careful and responsible as Elizabeth. It quickly became a clear sign that something was seriously wrong. As the hours went by, the feeling of dread intensified, marking the onset of a nightmare that no one was ready to face. When hours went by without any news of Elizabeth, her family didn't hesitate to take action. That same night, filled with fear and uncertainty, they started searching for her on their own. Their first stop was the bar where she worked, but the response they received was shocking. Elizabeth had not come in that day. Her concerned co-workers provided the family with an important lead, a detailed description of the man she was supposed to meet. They described him as overweight, with light brown skin and visible acne scars. He was a frequent customer at the bar, and although he didn't have a name, the description was detailed enough to help the family in their search. By February 15th, the family was increasingly worried due to the lack of news about Elizabeth. They decided to report her disappearance to local authorities, but encountered a common hurdle: bureaucracy. They were informed that they had to wait 24 hours before they could file an official report. Determined not to delay, they took to social media, creating pages, sharing photos, and soliciting the public's help. Despite their efforts, it felt as though Elizabeth and her white Jeep Liberty had completely disappeared. On February 16th, authorities officially expanded the report to include her missing vehicle. GPS tracking of Elizabeth's phone showed her movements, first to a Brazilian restaurant near the river, then to a motel, and finally to a park. The last recorded location was a downtown hotel in Tijuana. Her brother hurried there, but hotel staff denied him entry, and there was still no sign of Elizabeth or her Jeep. On Thursday, February 17th, her family used the vehicle's GPS history to track it to a street in Zona Norte. A sense of dread settled over them. Something was definitely wrong. Elizabeth's mother and brother drove directly to the location. Although the Jeep was there, Elizabeth was not. They called the police, and officers and firefighters arrived within minutes to secure the area. Their attention quickly turned to the trunk of the vehicle. What they discovered confirmed the worst fears of Elizabeth's family. Her lifeless body was inside, naked and curled up in a fetal position, exhibiting clear signs of violence. The heartbreaking scene devastated her family, leaving them in shock and disbelief. Elizabeth's family spoke out about her murder, the silence and inaction that preceded it. They highlighted a system that failed to respond when she went missing and the long wait for justice. The story quickly gained attention and sparked outrage throughout the city. Friends, co-workers, even strangers gathered at the scene. Elizabeth's body was taken to the forensic medical service for a complete autopsy. The findings were troubling. She had multiple blunt force injuries on her face, chest, and abdomen. A deep mark on her neck indicated an attempted strangulation. Additionally, there were signs of asphyxiation due to blockage of both her mouth and nose. Forensic experts determined that asphyxiation was the most likely cause of death. The investigation did not provide any information on possible abuse assault. Nonetheless, the case is officially categorized as a femicide, and an investigation is underway to find her murderer. The tragedy continued for the family after Elizabeth's passing. Just 3 days later, her mother suffered a sudden heart attack and died. Although the official cause was cardiac failure, many believed it was due to overwhelming grief that her body could not bear. As the family laid both mother and daughter to rest, the investigation picked up speed. Local and state authorities began to connect Elizabeth's case with others in the area. A frightening realization surfaced. This was not an isolated incident. The method of killing shared unsettling similarities with 2 other cases of young women who also worked in nightlife scene in Zona Norte. Karen, a 28-year-old mother from Veracruz, went missing on August 30th, 2021 after meeting a man at a motel. 3 days later, her body was discovered in a local garbage dump, showing obvious signs of violence. Karen had recently started working as a dancer and escort. She was careful about her safety, only meeting clients through direct phone calls. Before she left that day, she informed both a friend and a relative about her plans. Despite their quick efforts to find her, the situation ended in tragedy. Security cameras recorded the vehicle used by the man she met, and a friend later identified him from the video. However, surprisingly, no arrest warrant was issued, and the man remained at large. Angela Carolina Acosta Flores was only 20 years old when she was found dead in a hotel room on January 24, 2022, near the bar where Elizabeth worked. Like Elizabeth and Karen, Angela had gone to meet a man described as American and possibly of Hispanic descent. Her phone was missing from the crime scene, and when investigators traced it, they found it had been taken to Riverside, California, across the border. This discovery alarmed the investigators. 3 women had been brutally murdered, all linked by time, location, and method. Each case involved a mysterious man, likely American, and all 3 women were associated with the nightlife in the same area. They were killed within a 6-month period, leading to a troubling conclusion. There may be a serial killer targeting vulnerable women in Zona Norte. On Wednesday, November 16, 2022, the Baja California State Prosecutor held a highly anticipated press conference. With a room full of reporters and the nation watching, he confirmed a troubling presence. A serial killer was active in Tijuana. The prosecutor revealed that the suspect specifically targeted exotic dancers and escort who belonged to one of the city's most at-risk groups. His method was alarming. He would travel from the United States into Mexico, commit his crimes, and then escape back across the border, making it difficult for authorities to catch him. At that time, no additional details were shared to avoid compromising the investigation or alerting the suspect. Meanwhile, the manhunt for the killer was intensifying. Nearly a month later, on December 13th, The prosecutor held a second press conference. This time, the news was shocking. They had identified a suspect, an American citizen, whose psychological profile resembled that of Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers from the 1970s. However, there was a complication. The man had already left Mexico. Although a local arrest warrant was issued, it wasn't sufficient. Authorities sought a red notice from Interpol to enhance international cooperation. The FBI and U.S. consulates joined the search, and the suspect's physical description was made public to help locate him. Experts also conducted new forensic tests to ensure that no accomplices were missed. The breakthrough in the investigation came from detailed profiling. Investigators identified the man's methods. He targeted young women who were petite, attractive, and vulnerable. He portrayed himself as polite, respectful, and generous to gain their trust and lower their defenses. Once he had their confidence, he would lure them to secluded areas where he would then attack them. Each of the three known victims, Elizabeth Martínez, Karen, and Angela Carolina Acosta Flores, suffered extreme violence, with visible injuries primarily to their faces and chests. His method of asphyxiation was a defining characteristic. Two of the victims were found without clothes, while the third, although still dressed, had more injuries, indicating she may have fought back. This was not a crime of passion. It was deliberate, predatory, and systematic. Although these three cases gained media attention, they were not isolated. At the time of Elizabeth's disappearance, there were already rumors about other missing women with similar ages, professions, and unfortunate outcomes. Their stories have quietly faded away without resolution. As the investigation progressed, authorities were under pressure to act quickly. Although the suspect's identity remained confidential, local media labeled him as the Ted Bundy of Tijuana. His actual name was Bryant Rivera, a U.S. citizen with several known addresses in Southern California. Authorities searched these locations, but he was nowhere to be found. Family members described Bryant as working in e-commerce. Meanwhile, the Elizabeth's family was actively seeking justice for her. On February 14, 2023, marking 1 year since her murder, they revisited the site where her body was discovered and placed a floral tribute in the shape of a heart. Her brother spoke to reporters, expressing his deep sorrow and anger. A year had passed, and Bryant remained at large. The family's lawyer had been denied access to the case details, and the prosecutor's office had not provided any updates. Additionally, Elizabeth's Jeep Liberty, which was part of the crime scene, had yet to be returned. On July 6, 2023, Bryant was arrested in Los Angeles. The arrest took place calmly at his parents' home. However, he was only charged with the murder of Angela Carolina, while the murders of Karen and Elizabeth were not included in the U.S. charges, even though Mexico had made an active extradition request for all three cases. The Baja California prosecutor publicly confirmed Bryant's arrest, stating it was a result of collaboration between local and federal law enforcement agencies in the U.S. Bryant was assigned a public defender and requested bail. The judge denied the bail request, citing concerns about Bryant being a flight risk and a potential danger to women. He was ordered to remain in custody at Los Angeles County Jail. His family firmly rejected all allegations against him. His mother claimed he could never commit such acts of violence, and his sister even wrote a letter to support his character. However, the evidence suggested otherwise. On June 29, 2023, a federal judge in Los Angeles approved Mexico's request to extradite him. Family members of Angela were present at the hearing, along with the brother of Elizabeth. The courtroom was heavy with the sorrow of three grieving families. The judge emphasized that Bryant would remain in custody. As of June 2025, the extradition process is still ongoing. Legal experts estimate it could take up to 2 years to complete. If convicted of all three murders, Bryant could potentially face a total of 180 years in prison. However, due to Mexican law, the maximum sentence he could actually serve is 50 years. In addition, Mexican prosecutors have suggested that Bryant might be connected to a fourth victim, prompting them to investigate unsolved cases of missing women. Investigators are also re-examining surveillance footage from hotels and motels to determine if this predator has been active for a longer period than initially suspected. The situation surrounding Elizabeth has evolved from a personal tragedy to a representation of a larger national issue. Her death, along with the deaths of Karen and Angela, underscores the serious stigma and disregard that women in the escort industry encounter. When Elizabeth went missing, authorities did not intervene. Instead, it was her family who located her. It was her online activity, rather than official procedures, that ultimately pointed to her killer. Even now, despite an arrest, justice has not been achieved. The murder of Elizabeth Martínez Figueroa is a heartbreaking reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by women in Tijuana's nightlife and the devastating consequences of a system that too often fails them. Her vibrant spirit, her dreams of a brighter future, and her deep bond with her family were cruelly extinguished, leaving a void that echoes through her community. The cases of Elizabeth, Karen, and Angela reveal a chilling pattern of violence that demands urgent action. As Bryant Rivera's extradition process drags on, Elizabeth's family and countless others continue their relentless pursuit of justice, refusing to let her story fade into silence. This tragedy is not just a personal loss, but a rallying cry to confront the stigma, neglect, and impunity that perpetuate such crimes.
Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Valerie Pride. Valerie Pride was born on March 9, 1958, and grew up in Arizona with her 5 brothers and 1 sister, which contributed to her strong and determined character. She attended South Mountain High School, where she gained a reputation for her intelligence and ambition. After graduating, she aimed to continue her education at Arizona State University, driven to create a better future for herself. During her high school years, Valerie fell in love with a young man named Jimmy Pride. Their romance flourished, and in 1974, they got married. Just a year later, they welcomed their first daughter, Shansha. In 1977, their family expanded again with the birth of their second daughter, Duana. Despite being a young mother, Valerie continued to pursue her ambitions. She aspired to become an electrician, a profession that was predominantly male at the time, and she did not let anything stand in her way. By the time Duana was born, Valerie had been accepted into a job training program sponsored by the United Electrical Workers, a rare and competitive opportunity. She made history by becoming the first black female electrician at the Palo Verde nuclear plant, all while caring for her 2 young children. Her life was a delicate balance of motherhood, work, and being a trailblazer in her industry. However, Valerie faced challenges in her personal life as well. Her marriage to Jimmy eventually ended in divorce. Even so, she remained strong, focusing on her career and her children, and trying to give them the best life possible. After the divorce, Valerie found new love with Ben Daniels, a co-worker at the nuclear power plant. Ben also had children from a previous marriage, and as their relationship deepened, they began planning for their future together. Although they appear perfect on the outside, their relationship is actually unstable. Valerie's sister, Vicki McDonald, revealed that Ben's past was negatively affecting their relationship. Vicki mentioned that Ben would often reassure Valerie that he had everything under control. Despite these issues, Valerie maintained her faith in Ben and their future, and before long, the two took a big step forward in their relationship together. In 1982, Valerie and Ben decided to purchase a new home in a quiet area of South Phoenix, Arizona. This marked a significant milestone in their lives. They selected a newly constructed Spanish-style home, imagining it as a place for a new beginning. Meanwhile, Valerie was finishing her final year of training to become an electrician, nearing a career breakthrough. After her divorce, she had found love again, and now they had a new home to create memories with their daughters. Everything seemed to be going very well. Sometimes, life's most promising moments can disappear in an instant. Just weeks after moving into their new home, tragedy struck unexpectedly. Labor Day weekend in 1982 began like any other for Valerie and her daughters. It was meant to be a time for relaxation, family bonding, and simple pleasures. But on Monday, September 6th, what started as a normal day turned horrific. At around 4 p.m., Ben received a call that no parent ever wants to hear. His 9-year-old daughter from a previous relationship had had an epileptic seizure while bathing. Her mother was with her but had stepped out for a minute. In that short time, the little girl suffered a seizure and submerged underwater. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors battled to save her, but by the time Ben arrived, it was too late. His daughter had been pronounced dead. While Ben was at the hospital dealing with an unimaginable loss, Valerie and her daughters were at home, completely unaware of the situation. In a time before cell phones, Valerie had no quick way to contact Ben or find out what was happening, so she had to wait for him to call her. Around 9:30 that evening, Valerie spoke on the phone with Ben's brother. This call became her last known contact with anyone outside her home. They spoke for about 10 minutes, focusing on the condition of Ben's daughter in the hospital. During the conversation, there was a knock on the front door of Valerie's house. She informed Ben's brother that she needed to hang up to answer the door, as Ben was not home. That was the last time anyone heard from her. Neither she nor Ben's brother realized that this would be their final conversation. At around 10 p.m., after several hours in the hospital, Ben returned home, exhausted and grieving the loss of his daughter. He just wanted to get some rest. However, as he neared his house, he noticed something was wrong. The front door was slightly ajar, which was unusual, especially in the Arizona summer when everyone kept their doors closed to maintain cool air indoors. Ben carefully pushed the door open and stepped inside, where he saw a horrifying sight: blood everywhere. Valerie and her 2 daughters, Shancha and Duana, had been murdered. They had been brutally attacked in the living room, just a few feet apart. 8-year-old Shantia and 4-year-old Duana lay lifeless in the living room, their small bodies covered in blood. Valerie was also found dead near the kitchen, her body soaked in blood. The home they had just moved into, where they hoped to start anew, had turned into a scene of unimaginable violence. Ben's screams echoed through the night. Overwhelmed with grief, he collapsed, crying out so loudly that neighbors rushed outside to see what was happening. Unable to help, the neighbors called the police, as Ben was too devastated to do anything but mourn. For any parent, losing a child is an indescribable pain, but returning home to find one's entire family slaughtered is simply beyond comprehension. When the police arrived, even the most experienced officers struggled to comprehend the scene before them. Many described it as the most horrific crime scene they had ever encountered. Blood was everywhere, covering the floors and walls. Shansha and Duana were discovered huddled together in the living room near a love seat, still in their pajamas, which suggested that they were preparing for bed when the attack occurred. Valerie was found in the dining area close to the kitchen, her body just a few feet from the back door, as if she had been trying to escape. There were no signs of forced entry at the crime scene, indicating that the killer either had permission to enter or managed to get in without breaking anything. The police began to consider a disturbing possibility when they learned about a knock at the door during Valerie's last phone call. The person who knocked might have been the one responsible for the horrific crime. Furthermore, it was revealed that the suspect had not stayed in the house after the murders. They exited through the back door and jumped over the fence, vanishing into the night. The murders were initially believed to be the result of a robbery gone wrong, but that theory was quickly dismissed. There were no signs of forced entry, no stolen items, and no evidence of an intruder. Instead, they discovered a scene of shocking violence. Someone had entered the home with the singular purpose of committing murder. The pressing question for investigators was, who would want to kill a young mother and her children in such a brutal manner? Time was critical, as a dangerous killer was still on the loose, and they needed to apprehend him before he could strike again. That night, the neighborhood was quiet, but one person had noticed something unusual. As police officers searched the area, a neighbor mentioned hearing a loud argument coming from Valerie's home around 9:45 p.m., but thought it was just a typical family disagreement. When they looked outside, they saw nothing, no suspicious individuals, no signs of trouble, and nothing that seemed alarming. An hour later, at 11 p.m., Valerie's ex-husband, Jimmy Pride, arrived at the house. When the officers informed him that his daughters had been murdered, he collapsed on the pavement, screaming in anguish, just like Ben had. He couldn't contain his emotions, writhing in pain and sobbing. The anguish was so intense that the police had to intervene by force to calm him down. Meanwhile, behind the house, there was a bloody handprint on the wooden fence. This was clear evidence that the murderer had escaped by climbing over the fence and disappearing into the darkness, likely through the yard of a nearby abandoned home. But whose handprint was it, and what kind of person could commit such a brutal act? The investigation took a more disturbing turn when detectives learned that Valerie's family had only recently moved into the neighborhood. They had been there for just a few weeks, barely enough time to make friends, let alone enemies. No one truly knew them, yet someone wanted them dead. Detectives searched for answers by examining Valerie's life. They investigated her social relationships, her family, and sought any signs of a possible enemy. However, as they delved deeper, the truth became increasingly troubling. There was nothing to uncover. Valerie had no history of conflict, no long-standing grudges, and no background suggesting that she would meet a violent end. She was a devoted mother and lived an ordinary life. Yet, someone had violently disrupted that life in a horrific manner. Autopsies revealed that both Valerie and her two daughters, Shansha and Duana, had been attacked multiple times. Notably, there was no evidence of abuse, which eliminated one possible motive, but it did not bring them any closer to solving the case. With each passing day, the investigation stalled, unanswered questions continued to accumulate, and the town was left in a state of fear. On September 10, 1982, Valerie and her daughters were buried, but their funerals were filled with tension. The community was haunted by the reality that a killer remained at large. Detectives then discovered an unusual clue. A month before the murders, Valerie and Ben's home had been broken into. Initially, it appeared to be a simple burglary, but the details were alarming. The intruder rummaged through the house and also slashed their water bed. Disturbingly, they took Valerie's clothes and tossed them into the water, indicating a personal motive. It was clear that this was not a simple thief looking for valuables, but rather an enemy who wanted to send a message. Could this have been a threat? Did Valerie unknowingly encounter someone dangerous? Investigators were eager to find connections, but the case hit another dead end. The culprit had disappeared without a trace. As months went by, what seemed like promising leads faded away. Numerous tips came in, each one offering the possibility of a breakthrough, but none brought the detectives any closer to solving the case. What once felt urgent was now growing cold. As the situation became tense, rumors began to spread throughout the town, accompanied by various theories, such as ghosts in the night. One particularly chilling theory suggested that the recent murders were linked to the tragic death of Ben's daughter. Some residents speculated that Valerie and her daughters were murdered as a twisted form of revenge. Ben's 9-year-old daughter had died in an accident, leading some to believe that someone held Valerie responsible for it. However, investigators later clarified that the girl had suffered an epileptic seizure and had drowned, with the autopsy confirming that there was no foul play involved. Despite this, rumors continued to thrive, contributing to the growing anxiety in the town. As the one-year anniversary of the murders approaches, detectives have not yet found any new leads. The murders of Valerie and her daughters shocked the community, and investigators are still searching for information, but to no avail. Valerie's Union and the Silent Witness program have offered a $2,000 reward, yet no significant evidence has been uncovered so far. In August 1983, the case took an unexpected turn. Police announced that a suspect had been arrested, and the news quickly spread throughout the town, raising hopes that justice would be served. What surprised everyone, however, was that the suspect was only 14 years old and still a high school student. Authorities also disclosed that they were searching for 2 other suspects, one juvenile and one adult, believed to be involved in the murders. The police suspected that the murder might have been an act of revenge for the death of Ben's daughter, a theory that had been discussed but never confirmed. The arrested teenager was believed to be related to Ben's daughter. Could Valerie have been blamed for the child's death? Was there a deep-seated resentment that led to something violent? This idea was frightening, but it raised more questions than it answered. If Ben's daughter's death was considered an accident, why would anyone blame Valerie for it? And if the motive was revenge, why target her daughters as well? It was confusing, and even the investigators were skeptical. Just when it seemed that a motive had been identified, the case became more complicated. Within 24 hours of the arrest, the 14-year-old was released. The district attorney decided not to file charges, stating that more investigation was necessary. The evidence the detectives had was not strong enough to support a case in court. 2 other potential suspects were never arrested, no charges, no answers. The case, which had briefly reignited interest, went cold again. 2 years later, a neighbor found a surprising clue, a knife buried in a backyard. It closely resembled the one thought to have been used in the murders. Investigators quickly sent it to the crime lab, hoping it might finally provide a breakthrough. But once again, optimism turned into disappointment. The knife was tested for DNA, but there were no matches, no evidence linking it to Valerie, Shansha, or Duana. It was yet another dead end in a case that continued to be a mystery. As the years passed, the detectives never gave up on the case. They meticulously reviewed every piece of evidence, interviewed over 1,000 people, and followed every lead, but they still couldn't identify the killer or their motive. By 2012, investigators admitted that they had exhausted all possibilities and needed the public's help, believing that someone had vital information. They were convinced that this was a deeply personal crime. The perpetrator had entered Valerie's family home with the sole intention of committing murder. Now, more than 40 years later, the case remains unsolved. The brutal murders of Valerie, Shansha, and Duana continue to haunt the community, leaving an emotional scar that won't heal. Investigators think that someone close to Valerie might hold the key to the truth. But how could someone capable of such brutality carry on as if nothing had happened? Do they feel remorse? Do they ever worry about being caught? Or have they convinced themselves that they got away with murder? In recent years, advancements in forensic technology have allowed detectives to revisit the evidence. DNA collected from the crime scene has been submitted to a national database, raising hopes for a breakthrough. However, even if the killer is eventually identified, no explanation will ever make sense. Nothing can justify the horrific act of killing an innocent mother and her 2 young daughters. This crime epitomizes senseless violence. Valerie, Shansha, and Duana did not deserve what happened to them. Regardless of how much time has passed, one thing is clear: those capable of such a terrible act must be held accountable. Valerie Pride's life was a testament to resilience, ambition, and a profound love for her 2 daughters, Shansha and Duana. She was determined to pursue a stellar career as the first Black electrician at the Palo Verde nuclear power plant and to build a new life with Ben Daniels in South Phoenix. However, on Labor Day weekend in 1982, her family's dreams and future were brutally snatched away in a horrific act of violence. More than 40 years later, the mystery of who killed them and why remains unsolved, leaving a lasting pain in the community. Despite advances in forensic science, nothing can erase the tragedy that claimed the lives of an innocent mother and her 2 young daughters. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Jennifer Corbin. Jennifer Corbin, a 33-year-old woman, was married to Barton Corbin, a well-known 40-year-old dentist in Beaufort, Georgia. They have been together for 7 years and live in a beautiful house in an upscale neighborhood. They had 2 sons, Dylan and Dalton, aged 5 and 7. From the outside, the Corbins appeared to have an ideal life: a large house, happy family photos, and a stable family dynamic. Barton was regarded as a model father, while Jennifer was deeply devoted to motherhood. Despite their outward appearances, tensions between Jennifer and Barton had been growing. Jennifer, who had been a free-spirited woman in her younger years, transformed into a dedicated wife and mother after getting married and having her first child. She was known for her warm personality and her ease in building relationships with people from all backgrounds and age groups. Her sociable nature led her to volunteer at her church, where she worked in the Sunday school program for children. When Jennifer and Barton first met, her family warmly welcomed him, quickly treating him as one of their own. He often joined them on trips and spent most weekends with them. Barton was seen as intelligent and charismatic, easily winning over those around him. However, over time, the marriage began to falter. Jennifer eventually realized that continuing the relationship was no longer possible. Despite her repeated efforts to repair the marriage, she came to terms with its failure and began preparing for a divorce. Everything changed for the Corbin family on the morning of December 4, 2004. Their eldest son, Dalton, woke up to find the house unusually quiet. His mother usually rose earlier than everyone else, and his father, Barton, would already be preparing for work. But that morning, an eerie silence filled the home. Neither of his parents was anywhere to be found. Concerned, Dalton repeatedly called out to them, but there was no response. Finally, he entered his parents' bedroom and was horrified to find his mother lifeless. Horrified by the scene, Dalton, still wearing his pajamas, rushed to their neighbors for help, too distressed to even change his clothes. The neighbors quickly entered the house and confirmed that his mother, Jennifer, had passed away. Without wasting any time, they called emergency services at 11 a.m. When relatives were notified of the tragic news, they were in utter disbelief. Nobody could have ever imagined such a terrible incident, especially since Jennifer had always been viewed as a strong and devoted mother. By the time family members arrived at Jennifer's house, law enforcement officers were already on the scene conducting their investigation. Her sister Heather went to the neighbor's home to comfort and care for Dalton and Dylan. Meanwhile, Dalton was inconsolable, crying uncontrollably. The traumatic experience left a deep psychological scar on him, and he struggled for a long time to cope with the horrifying memory of what he had witnessed. Jennifer's body was found in the bedroom of her house. She was wearing a nightgown and lying on her side. A weapon was discovered under the sheet next to her, with her hand resting nearby. Divorce papers were also found under the sheet. On the nightstand, there was an open bottle of wine. Jennifer had been going through an incredibly difficult time. Her husband had filed for divorce, sought custody of their children, planned to take the case to the Supreme Court to claim their property, and even demanded alimony. At first glance, the scene suggests that Jennifer voluntarily ended her life. The challenges she faced seemed overwhelming, and she had previously expressed frustration at seeing what she had long considered an ideal marriage crumble before her eyes. During this time, Jennifer frequently confided in her loved ones, sharing her fears of potentially losing custody of her children and the difficulties she anticipated during the divorce proceedings. Despite the police initially ruling her death as a voluntary act of ending her life, her family strongly disagreed with this conclusion. By late December, their frustration with the authorities had reached its peak. They insisted that she would never harm herself. To her, the divorce was not a tragedy but rather an opportunity to finally gain the freedom she had long awaited, despite the obstacles ahead. Her family emphasized that Jennifer had at least two vital reasons to live: her two sons, Dalton and Dylan. Everyone who knew Jennifer well was convinced she would never harm herself. Even if she had, they believed she would neither have done it at home nor allowed her child to be the one to discover her. It was clear to everyone that someone else must have been involved. Her relatives demanded that the culprit be identified and brought to justice, while her parents even had a prime suspect in mind: her husband, Barton Corbin. Typically, in cases like this, the spouse is the first to be investigated. Accompanied by a lawyer, Barton went to the police station to answer their questions. He stated that the night before Jennifer's death, he had been at a restaurant with friends until 1 a.m. Afterward, he drove to his brother's house, where he spent the night. Barton explained that he and Jennifer had argued earlier, and he chose not to return home, meaning he hadn't seen her since the previous day. He voluntarily handed over the clothes he had worn that evening, and detectives found no traces of bloodstains, scratches, or signs of defensive wounds on him. Testing for gunpowder residue on his hands also came back negative. With no further evidence to implicate Barton, investigators had no additional questions for him. Meanwhile, Jennifer's relatives continued to insist that she had been murdered. As they pushed for further investigation, the district attorney began looking into the troubled history of Jennifer's marriage to Barton. What they uncovered was a dark past connected to Barton's time as a dentist. While investigators delved into Barton's background, they discovered that 14 years prior to Jennifer's death, He had been involved in another romantic relationship that ended under similarly suspicious circumstances. During that time, Barton dated a fellow dentistry classmate named Dolly Hearn, a bright, cheerful, and beautiful young woman. Interestingly, Jennifer's family had never heard of Dolly until the investigation began. But what had happened to Dolly? According to Dolly's sister, she met Barton in their third year at Georgia Medical College, where they were both studying dentistry and living on campus. Initially, the relationship seemed fine, but over time it grew strained and became increasingly aggressive. Witnesses recalled that as the relationship deteriorated, Barton became overly jealous and verbally abusive. Dolly eventually decided to end the relationship. However, following the breakup, her life took a troubling turn. A series of strange and unsettling incidents began occurring, leading Dolly to consider contacting the police. Her apartment was broken into, the windows of her car were smashed, paint was poured into her gas tank, and a parcel was stolen from her mailbox. Later, an essential coursework file containing a patient list from a dental clinic mysteriously disappeared. One particularly concerning incident involved someone breaking into Dolly's apartment and swapping her contact lens solution with hairspray. The most concerning incident, however, was the disappearance of her cat, which was never found. At first, Dolly dismissed these occurrences as mere bad luck, a rough patch in her life. But as the incidents mounted, she began to recognize a pattern. These were not random coincidences. Dolly felt targeted and tormented. She confided in friends and family, convinced that her ex-boyfriend Barton, who had been struggling to cope with their breakup and behaving aggressively, was responsible. Determined to catch Barton in the act, Dolly attempted to secretly record a conversation with him, hoping he would confess to his actions. However, Barton grew suspicious and abruptly ended the conversation. After that meeting, the unsettling incidents in Dolly's life began to taper off. Still, she lived in fear, avoiding being alone in her apartment and worrying about the possibility of future attacks or ambushes. As summer vacation approaches, Dolly gradually returns to her normal life, leaving all her problems behind and believing that Barton has ceased to harass her. She even attended her brother's graduation, looking radiant and happy. Tragically, no one could have predicted that she had only a few days left to live. On the afternoon of June 6, 1990, Dolly's neighbor discovered her lifeless body in her apartment. She died from a single weapon wound to the head. A weapon was found on her lap as she sat cross-legged. The weapon wound on the right side of her head led detectives to conclude that she had voluntarily ended her life. Similar to Jennifer's case years later, Dolly's death was quickly ruled as the end of her life. Unfortunately, due to the lack of investigative rigor in the 1990s, such cases were often inadequately examined. The presence of the weapon and the fundamental circumstances surrounding her death were accepted at face value, and the case was closed without additional investigation. Dolly's family, like Jennifer's relatives, is convinced that Dolly could not have voluntarily ended her life. They found it difficult to accept that such a bright, beautiful, and cheerful young woman, full of potential and showing no signs of depression, would voluntarily end her life. Both her mother and sister insisted that Barton should be investigated, especially because there had been a difficult breakup shortly before the tragedy, and his behavior had been suspicious. Although Barton was interrogated in the 1990s in connection with these suspicions, the authorities were unable to find concrete evidence linking him to a crime. Barton denied any involvement, and the investigation was eventually dropped, concluding that Dolly had voluntarily ended her life. Nonetheless, the case was never officially closed, thanks to Dolly's family's determination to seek justice. Her relatives tirelessly urged law enforcement to fully resolve the case. Even independent experts hired by the family concluded that Dolly's death was likely a voluntary act to end her life. Her mother, however, refused to believe that there was any good reason for her daughter to do so. Her mother maintained that Dolly had lived in fear of Barton during her final months and held him solely responsible for her death. Barton was described by his peers as intelligent and highly perceptive. His mind and ability to manipulate others often complicated matters. However, not everyone was deceived by him. For instance, one of Dolly's classmates believed her fears about Barton and repeatedly urged her to take precautions. Following this advice, Dolly decided to purchase a weapon for self-defense. Despite her financial difficulties, her father came to her aid, lending her a weapon and warning her that if she did not confront Barton, her life would be in danger. Tragically, his warning proved true. However, there was no evidence to implicate Barton in Dolly's death. Her case remained unsolved for 14 years until the death of Jennifer. The circumstances of Jennifer's death, including the weapon used and the staged nature of the scene, bore striking similarities to Dolly's case. Upon further investigation, authorities reopened Dolly's case and re-examined both incidents. They had no substance abuse, no criminal activity or negative influences, and no apparent reason for them to voluntarily end their lives. The only connection between them was Barton. The case files were retrieved from archives, allowing investigators to revisit the materials with a fresh perspective and advanced forensic techniques. Crime scene photos from 1990 were handed over to a blood spatter expert, who enlarged the images and identified 3 distinct marks that suggested the body had been moved after the attack. This raises doubts because it is very rare for a woman to die from self-inflicted injuries to the back of the head, an unusual method that requires an arm position which is difficult to achieve naturally. Furthermore, neither case included a suicide note. Would Jennifer truly have voluntarily ended her life without leaving a goodbye note for her children behind? The circumstances increasingly appeared staged. Investigators then initiated wiretapping of Barton's phone. When a friend called Barton and informed him that the investigation into Dolly's case had been reopened, he reacted angrily by calling his ex-girlfriend and making an abusive phone call. According to those who knew him, his disrespect for women was not uncommon. At the same time, he was always skillful at concealing his true behavior and attitude. Thanks to wiretapping, the authorities were finally able to uncover the truth about his real character. Jennifer's relatives, upon learning about Dolly's case, felt compelled to meet her family. They discovered many similarities, particularly a shared goal of holding Barton accountable and ensuring his imprisonment. What shocked Jennifer's family the most was that Barton had never mentioned the tragic story of Dolly. 6 years after that incident, he went on to marry Jennifer. Had Jennifer known about these unsettling details, she would never have pursued a relationship with him. Both families were stunned and questioned why the authorities had overlooked these connections for so long. Even 7-year-old Dalton, who found his mother's body, told detectives during their first conversation that he believed his father was responsible for her death. Those who knew Barton were well aware of his explosive temper. Jennifer's family recalled that, for years, he frequently had angry outbursts, often directed at her or their sons. Toward the end of their time together, arguments became a daily occurrence. Shortly before her death, Jennifer confided in her mother that she no longer loved Barton and was staying in the marriage solely for the sake of their children. However, she has recently realized that Barton's presence was not benefiting their children. According to her family, the turning point occurred on Thanksgiving in 2004. During the holiday, Barton suddenly declared that they needed to leave. Not wanting to provoke an argument, Jennifer gathered their sons and left with him. That evening, she called her sister and revealed that Barton had attacked her in the car, in front of their sons. The following Monday, Barton filed for divorce. He demanded ownership of the house, custody of the children, and alimony. 2 days later, Jennifer caught him going through her purse. He stole her personal diary and cell phone before leaving the house, running over her foot with his car as he drove away. Nevertheless, she did not report him to the police. At this point, Jennifer began fearing for her safety. Only 3 days later, she was found dead. Her family was shocked by Barton's reaction to the news of her death. He showed no emotion, no sadness or shock. His cold demeanor immediately raised suspicions among investigators. While his reaction suggested guilt, it was not enough evidence to charge him. Prosecutors required concrete evidence connecting Barton to the weapon discovered near Jennifer's body. Upon investigation, they discovered that the weapon was a rare, older Smith & Wesson model. Its serial number was traced back to a dealer in Alabama, who had sold it in 1957. This discovery provided investigators with an important lead. They learned that Barton had a close friend in Alabama named Richard Wilson, a weapon collector with a particular interest in rare models. Richard and Barton had been friends since their college days. Investigators decided to interview Richard on December 15, 2004. During the interview, he stated that he had only vaguely heard about Jennifer's death and knew none of the details. He claimed that Barton had merely mentioned his wife's death without offering any specifics. He also denied knowing anything about firearms related to the incident. Unfortunately, the encounter did not provide investigators with any useful information. The police then shifted their approach and decided to track the geolocation of Barton's mobile phone. Barton claimed that on the night of his wife's murder, he had been out of town with friends and had later stayed at his brother's house, returning only the following morning. He insisted that his wife and children were alone at home that night. However, the estimated time of Jennifer's death was around 2 a.m. Phone records revealed that Barton's mobile phone was near the house at the time of her death. This revelation destroyed Barton's alibi and significantly heightened suspicions, marking his first major misstep in the investigation. Based on data from local cell towers, Barton had arrived at Jennifer's house at approximately 1 a.m. and left at around 2 a.m., aligning precisely with the time of Jennifer's murder. A neighbor also reported seeing a car resembling Barton's near the house that night. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet and the path it entered Jennifer's head did not match the angle or location consistent with her self-harm. Blood samples from her face also showed a nearly 180-degree change in the direction of flow, contrary to what would normally be expected in a case of self-harm. A detailed forensic analysis of the bullet trajectory and gunshot residue further revealed that it would have been physically impossible for Jennifer to have held the weapon in such a manner to attack herself. Strangely, no fingerprints, neither hers nor anyone else's, were found on the weapon. This strongly suggests that the weapon was wiped clean after use. If Jennifer had died instantly, the question arose, who could have done this? Being a dentist, Barton would have had access to latex gloves, which he could have used to handle the weapon without leaving fingerprints. Another critical piece of evidence was the absence of gunpowder residue on Jennifer's hands. If she had attacked herself at such close range, gunpowder traces would have been unavoidable. Additionally, the mortal wound killed her instantly, causing her body to go limp. This would have made it impossible for her hand to be resting on the weapon underneath the sheet. Clearly, she could not have placed it there herself. County authorities were unable to complete their investigation into Jennifer's murder, but they had already charged Barton with the murder of Dolly. He was arrested, and his dramatic capture was broadcasted on the news. Barton clearly had no idea that the first charge against him was related to the massacre that had occurred 14 years earlier. For Dolly's family, the live broadcast of the arrest was the most meaningful moment of their lives, something they had been waiting for 14 years. Soon after, Barton faced accusations of murdering his spouse, Jennifer. Consequently, he had to confront two groups of prosecutors simultaneously. To defend himself, Barton hired top-tier lawyers. During the preliminary hearing, Barton's defense attorney argued that Jennifer and Dolly had voluntarily taken their own lives, claiming that the link between Barton and the cases was purely coincidental. Several independent forensic experts supported this argument, aligning their findings with the defense's claims. Additionally, the defense insinuated that renewed interest in Jennifer's case had reignited suspicions about Dolly's death, accusing investigators of drawing superficial and unfounded conclusions in both cases. The prosecution, however, highlighted the improbability that two women, Jennifer and Dolly, both romantically involved with the same man, would die in similarly tragic circumstances as mere coincidence. While the prosecutor's office presented strong evidence, the defense skillfully challenged these claims. For example, they argued that the blow during the Thanksgiving altercation was not an act of domestic violence but an unintentional slip, a point that could weaken the prosecution's case. As for the absence of fingerprints on the weapon used in Jennifer's murder, the defense explained that the textured surface of the handle made it difficult to produce clear prints, a claim supported by some forensic experts. In the Supreme Court, the defense aimed to counter the prosecution's arguments by highlighting procedural errors in the investigation and methodically addressing each point. They proposed alternative explanations, such as the possibility that gunpowder particles were trapped in Jennifer's hair, which could account for the absence of traces on her hands. The defense meticulously analyzed inconsistencies in the prosecutor's narrative, including presenting a plausible angle of bullet entry and demonstrating a method of holding the weapon that Jennifer could have executed herself. Barton's phone was detected near Jennifer's house around 2 a.m., but the defense argued that this was insignificant due to the unknown exact time of her death. This argument gained traction as her body temperature suggested that she might have died much later. One expert estimated her death occurred around 6 or 7 a.m., a time when Barton was confirmed to have been elsewhere. The defense also emphasized that Jennifer had strong motives to end her life due to her tumultuous personal circumstances, including a divorce, a collapsing family situation, the risk of losing both her home and custody of her children, and the possibility of having to pay alimony to her husband. Further complicating the situation was Jennifer's online relationship with a man named Chris, which had been ongoing for some time. This relationship caused her to worry about her emotional stability, which negatively affected her public image. Barton's chances of winning the custody battle seemed stronger in light of this revelation. Jennifer's family feared that the defense would use her online relationship to tarnish her reputation during the hearings. However, they understood her actions, as she had been seeking comfort and emotional connection after spending years in a relationship with Barton, whom she no longer loved. Her correspondence with Chris continued up until the final moments of her life. The police eventually discovered the true identity of Jennifer's online correspondent, a woman named Anita, from Missouri, a mother of 2 children who had simply been searching for a pen pal. Anita had introduced herself as a man when she began communicating with Jennifer. Sharing her struggles, Anita found common ground with Jennifer, though the 2 women had never met in person. Importantly, Anita had no connection to Jennifer's death. Meanwhile, prosecutors faced significant challenges in the case, as Barton's defense team excelled in highlighting flaws in the investigation. The most significant issue was the lack of evidence directly connecting the weapon to Barton. A pivotal development shifted the course of the case when the Supreme Court investigated telephone wiretaps. It was discovered that, on November 30, 2004, Barton had a face-to-face conversation with his friend Richard in Alabama, rather than communicating over the phone as previously believed. The investigation revealed that the weapon used in the crime belonged to Richard, leading to significant progress in the case. Just 1 day after Barton filed for divorce and 5 days before the murder, he visited Richard, the owner of the weapon. This revelation greatly strengthened the prosecution's position. In September, an investigator handed the prosecutor a note from the Alabama police chief, revealing critical new information. The note stated that Richard had been questioned about the weapon. During the interrogation, the police chief reported that Richard had admitted Barton approached him on November 30, 2004, seeking the weapon for self-defense. Barton, worried that his wife might be unfaithful and amid a contentious divorce, feared for his safety. Richard willingly handed the weapon over to Barton, which proved to be a key breakthrough in the case. This new evidence directly links Barton to the weapon and confirms that his wife, Jennifer, was unable to access it. A major challenge for Barton's defense team arose just days before the trial was set to begin, when this critical information was revealed. The development gave the district attorney newfound confidence in securing a conviction. The prosecutor approached Barton's lawyers with a final offer: if Barton confessed to the murders, he could avoid capital punishment and instead face life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. This was an important consideration, as both Dolly's and Jennifer's cases carried the potential for the death penalty. After discussions among authorities across various counties, a deal was negotiated. Barton would receive life imprisonment with parole eligibility if he admitted his guilt. Barton's attorneys presented the offer to him, and after careful deliberation, an agreement was made. On Friday, September 15, 2006, Barton appeared in court. Instead of mounting a defense for acquittal or fighting the possibility of capital punishment, Barton surprised everyone by confessing to the crimes. Faced with the overwhelming evidence amassed by the prosecutor's office, Barton understood that his chances of winning a jury trial were slim. He made the choice to confess, likely motivated by the desire to avoid the risk of execution and to secure a chance at life in prison. Ultimately, Barton weighed his options and made his decision. His confession was a shocking revelation for Dolly's family, who had long since lost hope of receiving such news. Despite their initial disbelief, it became widely believed that Barton was responsible for the deaths of Jennifer and Dolly. The defense argued that Barton's actions were driven by a desire to spare his children the pain of losing another loved one. However, many viewed this assertion as hypocritical and unconvincing. In reality, Barton seemed primarily concerned with saving himself from a lethal injection. Jennifer's two sons, Dalton and Dylan Corbin, were placed in the care of Jennifer's sister, Heather. Their father was sentenced to life in prison, and all contact with him was permanently severed. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Lauren Johansson. That evening, it was quite quiet. A light wind rustled the treetops near the cemetery by the Wolf River. A car sat on the side of an abandoned road, motionless and untouched for hours. But something was wrong. When the police arrived, a man jumped out and ran into the woods. The officers rushed after him, but the thick undergrowth, the dark night, and the uneven ground prevented them from catching the fugitive. Meanwhile, Robert Lance Johansson, Lauren's father, broke past the police, his heart pounding. His daughter had been missing for days, and now her car was right in front of him. He ran up to the door and took a deep breath. What he saw inside changed everything. Lauren Johansson was born on October 30, 2001, in Ocean Springs, a quiet and picturesque town. The town attracted tourists with its green alleys, cozy beaches, and beautiful landscapes. But for Lauren, it was not just a place on the map, it was her home. Here, she grew up, surrounded by the love of her family. It was where she learned to be strong. Lauren grew up in a family where caring for others was part of life. Her parents, Lance and Tamla Robinson Johansson, surrounded their daughter with warmth. However, their life was not easy. Both of her older sisters had serious health problems, and from childhood, Lauren helped her parents take care of them. It was then that she learned patience and compassion, qualities that became part of her character. She was always ready to come to the rescue. She never complained and always put others before her own needs. From childhood, Lauren adored animals and was fascinated by wild birds. Her parents supported her hobby, and when Lauren became a teenager, she began to actively help in animal shelters. She looked after homeless cats and cared for horses after injuries. She treated wild animals and made it her life's goal to open her own shelter for rescued animals, to help those who could not help themselves. For this, she saved every cent, working since school. Lauren always wanted to help not only animals but also people. That's why she decided to become a nurse. She attended the University of Southern Mississippi and was successful in her studies despite working part-time jobs. Not only that, she also wanted to combine her studies with volunteer work. She worked day and night because she wanted to change the world for the better. In her senior year of high school, Lauren met Bryson Rivers. He was an athlete admired by everyone, raised in a religious and conservative family. As the eldest son, he carried a great responsibility since childhood, learning about discipline, respect for elders, and leadership qualities. He achieved success in sports, especially in football and athletics. Loved by teachers and admired by classmates, it seemed that he and Lauren were the ideal couple, supporting each other's dreams, they appearing happier than anyone else. However, this outer ideal hid a terrible truth, one that led to that night when they found her car on an abandoned road. At the beginning of their relationship, Bryson seemed caring and attentive. He showed interest in her life, listened to her daily experiences, and supported her dreams. Lauren appreciated his care. Bryson was proud of her kindness and determination. But over time, his care turned into obsessive control. At first, he just wanted to spend more time with her. Then he began to get jealous, asking more and more questions and urging her to communicate less with others. Soon, this behavior became a requirement. Lauren's friends noticed that she had changed. She began to avoid parties and meetings, stopped discussing Bryson. If someone asked about him, she justified his behavior, even when it became more manipulative. Lauren convinced herself that it was all because of love. Bryson had agitated outbursts of aggression mixed with displays of affection. If she tried to set boundaries, he would create a scene, only to apologize later and convince her it was for the sake of their future. He pressed on her feelings of guilt, saying she was the one provoking his jealousy. She didn't understand that she was in a toxic cycle. He would shout, then apologize, promising that everything would change, only for history to repeat itself. Later, when she told her friends, she tried to justify him, but they saw that she had changed. She became quieter, talked less about her feelings, and justified his actions more and more. He abruptly cut her off during public conversations, and when someone paid attention to her, he would react negatively. One time, when Lauren simply thanked a waiter for good service, Bryson's face changed immediately, and he spent the rest of the evening making sarcastic comments. She felt guilty even though she had done nothing wrong. Lance, her father, felt that something was wrong. He was worried and tried to talk to his daughter, but she brushed him off. Over time, she became more and more withdrawn. She didn't realize that she was no longer in control of her life. By December 2023, Lauren and Bryson were planning a trip, which she thought would be a romantic getaway, but he saw it as an opportunity to tighten his grip. Bryson was on leave from the army, and Lauren was on winter break from college. She wanted a change of scenery, while he wanted to isolate her. At first, everything seemed perfect. They walked around the city, visited the sights, and ate dinner at nice restaurants. Bryson seemed calm, but underneath the surface of this happiness, there was tension. Lauren felt this but ignored it. She believed that everything would be fine. On December 11th, Lauren and Bryson went to a bar to watch a football match. For Bryson, it was an important evening, and he was not going to miss it. At first, things were going quietly, but as soon as Lauren went to the restroom, the situation suddenly changed. She asked the waiter where the restroom was and left. A minute later, the same waiter accidentally walked down the same corridor, not even suspecting the effect this would have on Bryson. When Lauren returned to the table, she immediately felt that something was wrong. Bryson was tense, his gaze was harsh, and his voice was sharp. The more Lauren tried to calm him down, the worse it became. His accusations grew more absurd, her voice got louder, and his anger intensified. The people in the bar noticed the tension, but no one intervened. They left before anything serious could happen, but the real nightmare was just beginning. As soon as they got into the car, Bryson immediately locked the doors. He turned off the sound on her phone, snatched it, and put it in his pocket. Lauren was trapped. Bryson screamed and raged at her without explaining where he was taking her, but he continued to hit and intimidate her. His threats became more and more terrifying. Lauren was shaking with fear when the car stopped at a deserted park. She understood he wasn't going to let her go just like that. Lauren carried a gun in her bag just in case she tried to get it, but Bryson was faster. He snatched the bag from her hands. Now, she had no chance to save herself. For the next hour, he continued to hit her, speaking with frightening coldness. He smirked and said, "Her face now looks like a bowling ball." This phrase was accidentally recorded on her phone. At some point, Bryson made a mistake. He called his mother and screamed into the phone for help. Hearing Lauren's screams, his mother immediately called the police. Meanwhile, Lauren's father saw her location on the family GPS tracking. The police were already on their way. The officers heard her screams coming from the locked car, broke down the door, and saw Lauren beaten, shaking, with a swollen face, marks all over her body. Bryson was arrested shortly afterwards. Lauren was taken to the hospital. Her injuries were serious, and doctors were shocked by the level of violence she had suffered. Despite everything she had been through, Lauren didn't want to ruin his life. She refused to press charges. Even from jail, Bryson found ways to contact her. Every time, he said the same thing: "Forgive me, I will change, I need you," and part of her wanted to believe him. She changed her testimony to mitigate his guilt, but it was a mistake that changed the course of the whole case. Bryson remained in custody awaiting trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming: audio recordings from Lauren's phone, her initial testimony, and doctors' reports of her injuries. The court set bail at $250,000, which kept him behind bars temporarily. After 6 months, lawyers asked for the amount to be reduced. The judge agreed and reduced the bail to $150,000. Lauren's family was in shock. They knew that if he got out, Lauren would be in danger. But Bryson's mother quickly raised the money, and he was released while awaiting trial. After his release, Bryson was required to wear a GPS bracelet. He was forbidden to approach Lauren, write, or call her. Soon, a more serious situation arose. A few days after his release, Bryson's bracelet battery began to run low. He received several warnings about the need to charge it, but he ignored them. Eventually, the device completely discharged and became useless. The system immediately recorded a failure, and the authorities were alerted. However, they did not take urgent measures. Instead of responding immediately, they wasted hours and then a whole day without taking any action. No one reported it. He was again at large without supervision. Lance, Lauren's father, found out about it only through a voicemail from the police, in which they calmly informed him that Bryson had disappeared. They didn't even tell him exactly when it had happened. Robert was furious. He immediately called the police demanding action, but the police still dragged their feet. Hours passed, then days, and Bryson was on the run. Then Lauren disappeared. On July 2, 2024, Lance tried to call her, but the phone was silent. Soon, he received a strange message from her number. The text seemed alien, as if it hadn't been written by her. Lance felt a cold fear. He immediately called his other daughter, Caitlin, who lived with Lauren, and asked her to check if everything was okay. What she saw made her immediately call her father. The door to their apartment was wide open, all the security cameras were turned off, and Lauren's car was gone. Lance immediately reported his daughter missing, but the police hesitated again. A day passed before they finally agreed to track her car. On July 3, 2024, the police finally tracked Lauren's GPS. Her car was found in a remote area near the cemetery by the Wolf River. It was an isolated area surrounded by thick forest, far from busy roads. Lance rushed there as soon as he found out. When the officers approached the car, a man suddenly jumped out and rushed into the forest. It was Bryson Rivers. The police chased after him, but he disappeared among the trees. Lance, frantic with fear, rushed to the car. He opened the door, saw Lauren was lying in the back seat, her body wrapped in black plastic bags, her face and head covered. As a doctor, he had seen many terrible injuries, but nothing could prepare him for this. The police began to record evidence, but one thing was clear: this was not just a murder, it was a brutal, monstrous massacre. When forensic experts began to examine the car, they were confronted with a terrible sight. Blood stains on the upholstery indicated that Lauren had been subjected to a brutal and prolonged attack until her death. Lance was unable to leave the crime scene even when his health began to deteriorate from the stress he had experienced. He refused to leave until the investigators had finished their work. The search for Bryson continued for several hours, with helicopters equipped with thermal imaging scanning the forest for the slightest trace. Finally, a thermal signal was recorded, and the police surrounded him from all sides. After 9 hours of searching, Bryson was detained. He did not resist, his face remained calm, as if he did not realize what he had done. During interrogation, Bryson tried to give his version of events. He admitted that he came to Lauren's house that day knowing that she would be alone. He was angry that she no longer answered his calls. He waited for her to come out and then approached her. According to him, he just wanted to talk, but when Lauren refused and tried to leave, he grabbed her, dragged her into the car. She struggled, but he locked the doors and drove away. He took her to a deserted place outside the city, convinced that they needed to talk alone, but the conversation quickly turned into an argument. Lauren demanded that he let her go and threatened to call the police, which made him even angrier. He started yelling, blaming her for all their problems and for their breakup. When she tried to open the door and run out, he pushed her back into the car. He claims he was just trying to calm her down, but he hit her until she stopped moving. When he realized Lauren wasn't breathing, he tried to bring her to her senses, but it was too late. Realizing she was dead, he made a conscious decision. He took a blanket from the trunk, wrapped her body, and put it in the back seat. He then drove her to the cemetery by the Wolf River, where he left the car, planning to return later to get rid of the evidence. However, the police found the car before he could carry out his plan. Lauren's death and Bryson's arrest caused a wave of media outrage. This case was not only about the crime itself. People were shocked by how much the justice system had failed. How did it happen that a man with obvious signs of danger was released? Why did no one stop him earlier? How could the court ignore the evidence? And most importantly, could this murder have been prevented? Lauren's relatives, despite their grief, did not remain silent. They made a statement demanding reforms in the system so that such things would not happen again. They repeatedly demanded accountability for the mistakes that led to their daughter's murder. However, Bryson was not the only one condemned by society. Bryson's mother, who posted bail for him, faced particularly harsh criticism from the public. Despite the outrage, Lauren's family did not blame her directly. For them, it was more important to address the flaws in the system rather than punish a specific individual. Hundreds of people attended Lauren's funeral, friends, relatives, and residents of her hometown. She was not just a victim, she was a person who dreamed of helping others so that her goodness would not go to waste. In her memory, her family created a foundation that would help save animals, as Lauren had dreamed of doing in life. The trial of Bryson began in December 2024. He was charged with kidnapping, first-degree murder, and destruction of evidence. On Thursday, Rivers was taken by police to the county courthouse in downtown Hattiesburg, where he appeared before Judge Bob Helfrich for arraignment. So far, Bryson Rivers has pleaded not guilty to the murder of Lauren Johansson. The trial date has been set for June 25, 2025. As the trial continues, one question remains unanswered: will he receive the punishment he truly deserves, or will there be another loophole that allows him to evade full responsibility? For Lauren's family, this fight has long transcended a single case. They now aim to ensure that no one else has to endure what they experienced. In January 2024, in northern Chile, a vast and barren desert became the site of a disturbing discovery. Human remains were found buried beneath the sand near the city of Calama, an isolated area where the harsh climate can preserve bodies for a long time. Their thorough examination indicated that the remains had been intentionally hidden. The rocky terrain made digging challenging. Authorities later confirmed that the remains belonged to a woman. Preliminary forensic analysis shows she died from a gunshot wound to the head. Remains identified as those of Javiera Jimenez, who went missing in 2022. Javiera Jimenez grew up in Chile. As the eldest daughter, she developed a strong sense of responsibility early on. Her parents worked diligently to create a comfortable life for their children and instilled values of determination and independence in them. Javiera learned quickly that to succeed, she would need to rely on her own hard work. From a young age, she was known for her energetic and goal-oriented personality. In school, she excelled in academics, especially in math and science. However, her greatest passion was working with people. She had a natural talent for connecting with others. She was always eager to help and foster relationships. As a teenager, Javiera aspired to become a dentist. After finishing high school, she enrolled in college to study dental care, dreaming of becoming a skilled professional and eventually opening her own practice. Determined to advance her career, she balanced her studies with a part-time job as a hostess at a bar, where she welcomed customers and helped create a friendly atmosphere. This job not only provided her with income but also helped her enhance her communication skills. In addition to her studies and work, Javiera was actively building her presence on social media. She began by sharing small posts about her daily life, which garnered a larger audience over time. She collaborated with local brands to promote clothing, cosmetics, and other products. Her charm and engaging personality quickly made her blog popular. Javiera didn't focus only on work and academics. She prioritized personal development, was determined to achieve financial independence. At 18, she moved out of her family home, managed all her living expenses on her own. Her family was proud of her early independence and her ability to overcome challenges. Despite her busy schedule, Javiera always made time for her family, staying close to her mother and brothers, visiting them regularly, and sharing her future aspirations. A stagnant life was never an option for her. She was constantly striving to progress. Before she vanished, she had ambitious plans. She was getting ready to move into a new home, aiming to advance her social media career and continuing her studies. Javiera met Andres Sutter in 2022 through a group of mutual friends she frequently hung out with. Initially, there were no red flags with Andres. He was charming, self-assured, and good at building relationships. He made a strong first impression, appearing considerate, engaged, and truly interested in her life. Soon after, their talks evolved into a romantic relationship. In the beginning, everything felt ideal. He was supportive, encouraged her goals, and admired her independence. However, as time passed, red flags began to appear. Javiera noticed that Andres was excessively jealous. He was uncomfortable with her job at the bar, monitored her interactions, and frequently asked where she was, who she was with. His behavior became increasingly intrusive. He would show up unexpectedly, even when she had told him she was busy. He went through her phone, questioning every new contact. His jealousy became unreasonable. He particularly disliked it when Javiera spent time with friends, especially if men were present. Soon, other troubling issues emerged. Andres was often unclear about his own activities. He didn't have a steady job but always seemed to have money. When she inquired about his work, he avoided giving direct answers. Over time, Javiera discovered that Andres's name was associated with certain groups involved in illegal activities. Among a small circle of friends, rumors circulated that he might be involved in criminal activities, including theft and the illegal trade of copper. The turning point in Javiera and Andres's relationship occurred when Javiera discovered that Andres was living a double life. She wanted nothing to do with illegal activities and didn't want to be involved with someone who could put her in harm's way. Eventually, she decided to end their relationship, stating that she couldn't see a future with him. However, Andres refused to accept her decision. He continued to pursue her, calling her frequently, showing up uninvited, and trying to persuade her to return to him. He dismissed her rejection, believing that she would eventually change her mind. As Javiera started to avoid him, Andres became even more persistent, threatening her by claiming he knew everything about her and wouldn't allow her to leave. Javiera had no idea that their breakup would have serious consequences. On August 26, 2022, Javiera's day began like any other. She and her mother, Gladys Galagillos, went to a shopping mall, had lunch, and discussed the changes coming in Javiera's life. Javiera is moving out. She was excited about this new chapter. During their conversation, Javiera expressed her ambitions for the future. She discussed her goals of advancing her career, increasing her income through social media, and completing her education. Her enthusiasm and drive were evident. Her mother felt happy seeing her daughter so excited. After their outing, they returned home, where Javiera assisted her mother with household chores, then folded the things into the suitcase. Later that evening, before leaving, Javiera mentioned to her mother that she intended to spend the night at a friend's house. This was not unusual, as she often stayed over with friends. Once she arrived, she and her mother continued to text each other, as they usually did. Everything seemed perfectly normal. However, as midnight approached, a text arrived that changed everything. Andres messaged her, "I found your dog." This news was monumental for Javiera, as her dog, Lucky, had been missing for a few days, and she had been searching tirelessly. She had even posted on social media, offering a reward for Lucky's safe return, so she immediately reacted to Andres's message. Then she stopped texting her mom. A few hours later, all attempts to contact her by phone were unsuccessful. The next day, Javiera was expected to come home, but she never arrived. Her family started reaching out to her friends, but no one knew her whereabouts. Her sudden disappearance left her loved ones in distress. They had only two clues: their last conversation with her and a message that later became crucial in the investigation. Javiera's disappearance caused deep concern for her family and friends. However, the one person who seemed unconcerned was Andres. When her mother finally managed to reach him, he responded in a detached manner, showing no signs of worry. When Gladys inquired about her daughter's location, he calmly stated he had no idea and then proceeded to share his version of events. That night, he met with Javiera to help her search for her missing dog. They drove to several places but couldn't find it. To distract her, he suggested going to Calama, his hometown. Javiera agreed. She had a suitcase with her because she was moving the next day, so it seemed she might have intended to stay at his place overnight. However, his account became less clear from there. He claimed they had an argument during the trip. Suddenly, Javiera realized that her suitcase was missing. She thought it might have fallen out of the trunk. Distressed, she insisted they go back to look for it. According to Andres' testimony, he left Javiera at the entrance to the city of Calama while he returned to retrieve a suitcase that fell out of the truck they were both traveling in. This version of events was confusing. Javiera was supposedly left alone on a highway at night, far from the city, without a way to get home or call for help. However, Andres made no effort to persuade her to return to the car, nor did he check if she was safe. Gladys immediately sensed something was wrong with his account. When she pressed him for details, Andres began to contradict himself. At first, he said he had dropped her off near Calama, then he changed it to somewhere on the way back to Antofagasta. He couldn't remember the exact spot, which raised further suspicion. When Gladys asked why he hadn't called her or any of Javiera's friends to inform them that he left her alone at night, Andres hesitated. He said he thought she was just upset and would find her way home. A few hours later, he altered his story again, claiming that he had been in a car accident after leaving Javiera. He said another car had collided with his from behind, and he went to the hospital for a checkup. This, he explained, was why he didn't go back to look for her. Late Saturday night, almost 24 hours after Javiera went missing, her mother received an unexpected and concerning message from an unknown number. It read, "Mom, it's me. I left. There was an accident. I need some time. Don't worry about me. I'll come back once everything is settled. Love you. Take care of Grandma and my brother." Gladys read the message repeatedly, sensing something was amiss. The tone felt distant and impersonal, which alarmed her, but the errors stood out even more. Javiera was always meticulous with her texts, avoiding shortcuts and spelling mistakes. This message, however, was filled with typos and awkward phrasing that didn't match her style. Gladys tried to call the number, but the call failed. The phone had already been turned off, increasing her anxiety. Worried, she showed the message to Javier's friends, and they all agreed Javier would never write something like this. They recognized her usual texting style and emotional expressions. The content of the message was also suspiciously vague. Where was she? What kind of accident had occurred? Why hadn't she provided more details? Why send a cryptic message from an unknown number instead of calling? Gladys took immediate action and reported the message to the police. They documented it as a potential attempt to mislead the investigation and distract from a possible crime. A task force was quickly assigned to the case. Investigators traced the message to its originating SIM card. The phone carrier confirmed it was linked to a false identity, a common method used when buying anonymous prepaid cards. Next, law enforcement tried to locate the phone. They hoped to find its general location, but it had been turned off shortly after the message was sent. The last known signal placed it near Calama, the same area where Andres claimed to have last seen Javiera. Further examination revealed that the phone had only been used once, suggesting the message was pre-planned and aimed at deceiving her family into believing she had left on her own terms. Experts analyzed the content of the message and found that it did not match Javiera's usual writing style. The errors and unusual phrases were clear indicators that it was not written by her. This finding became a crucial piece of evidence, suggesting that the message was fabricated and indicating that Javiera did not disappear voluntarily. As a result, investigators began treating the case as a potential crime, with Andres emerging as the primary suspect. However, the investigation progressed slowly due to a lack of concrete evidence. Concerned that each passing day without answers diminished their chances of uncovering the truth, Javiera's family and friends initiated their own investigation. They spoke with people familiar with Andres, examined his background, and searched for any links to criminal activity. Soon, they discovered evidence connecting him to illegal operations. Through shared contacts, they found individuals who claimed Andres had participated in stealing copper from trains and was allegedly part of a group that extracted and sold metals on the black market. Furthermore, accounts of his aggressive behavior emerged. Those who knew him described him as having a short temper and a tendency to get into conflicts, often involving physical fights, and inability to tolerate being contradicted. These details increased the family's concerns. If Andres had a history of aggression, he was certainly capable of committing a serious crime, particularly in a moment of rage. Javier's friends recalled that she had confided in them about Andres becoming increasingly controlling and obsessive. They found old messages where she expressed worry that he was tracking her, calling her several times a day, and demanding to know her whereabouts. While her loved ones continued to search for answers, the police conducted a forensic examination of Andres's car. Since he was the last person known to see Javier alive, his truck could contain important evidence. Inside the truck, investigators discovered traces of blood. Initial analysis showed stains on the passenger seat and the interior of the door. They also found fibers that seemed to match the clothing Javier was wearing. The blood samples were sent for DNA testing. A few days later, the results confirmed the worst fears: the blood belonged to Javiera Jimenez. This revelation completely undermined Andres's claim that he had simply dropped her off on the highway. If she had left his truck voluntarily, why was her blood found inside? And if she had been injured, why didn't he report it? Police obtained GPS data from Andres' vehicle, which revealed that on the night Javier disappeared, he was driving towards Calama. However, instead of taking the main road, he opted for a side road that led into the desert. His car remained in that isolated area for a long time before it continued on its way. This discovery became a significant turning point in the case, leading investigators to suspect that a crime may have taken place there or that evidence was concealed. When Andres learned that the police had received forensic results, he understood that his arrest was imminent. His behavior changed. He ceased communication with everyone, including those he previously trusted. The day before he was scheduled to be questioned by police, he suddenly packed a bag and left his apartment. Surveillance cameras recorded him exiting the building with a small backpack and getting into a car. Neighbors later confirmed that he left in a hurry and did not return. Authorities quickly issued an arrest warrant for him, but by that point, he was already gone. Further investigation showed that Andres had used false documents to cross the border, making him a fugitive. His name was added to an international criminal database, but he managed to evade capture. For Javier's family, the only option was to continue seeking justice and waiting. They believed strongly that he would eventually slip up again. When he did, they were confident that the law would catch up with him. Law enforcement's initial efforts to catch Andres were unsuccessful. They found his abandoned car on the outskirts of Antofagasta, but he was missing, indicating he had carefully planned his escape. Phone records revealed that, just hours before disappearing, he had contacted several people already under investigation for criminal activities, suggesting he used these connections to vanish. Eventually, investigators confirmed that Andres had illegally fled Chile into Bolivia. He avoided official crossings by using lesser-known smuggling routes favored by traffickers. After crossing the border, he adopted a new identity. For months, he successfully evaded capture, fully aware that authorities were searching for him. Despite the challenges in the investigation, Javier's family refused to lose hope. Gladys tirelessly worked to keep the case in the public eye, ensuring that Andres appeared on international wanted lists. The family engaged with the media, raised awareness on social networks, and distributed flyers with his photo, hoping that someone would recognize him and notify the authorities. The turning point in the investigation came when a reward was offered for information that would lead to Andres's capture. The family pledged a generous sum to anyone who could provide credible information about his location. This approach proved effective, as tips began to emerge. By late 2023, reports indicated that Andres had been seen in a Bolivian city, living a secluded life and avoiding attention while keeping limited contact with locals. Bolivian authorities started monitoring his movements. They learned, through informants, that he was using a false identity, taking odd jobs, and avoiding any official documents that might reveal who he really was. However, he could not remain hidden forever. In January 2024, a local resident reported his exact location to the police. Authorities responded quickly, initiating a targeted operation to capture him. They surrounded the building where Andres was hiding. The operation was quick and efficient. He complied with their commands and was apprehended without resistance. During his arrest, he remained calm, seemingly resigned to his situation. This time, there was no way to escape. Andres was officially in custody and would soon face justice in Chile. After confirming his arrest, Bolivian authorities began the process of extraditing Andres back to Chile. Within days, he was returned to face trial, allowing Javier's family to see the person responsible for their daughter's death held accountable. However, this was just the start of a long battle for them, as they were determined to push for the harshest possible sentence. Once in Chile, Andres was placed in a detention facility, marking a new phase in the investigation. With the main suspect in custody, authorities had a chance to uncover the answers they had sought for over a year and a half. Initially, he refused to cooperate, denying any involvement in Javier's disappearance. However, investigators were ready, armed with evidence linking him to the crime. As the pressure increased, he eventually admitted. His confession lacked any sign of remorse or justification, delivered as if stating a simple fact. He neither portrayed himself as a victim nor showed any regret, maintaining a disturbingly calm demeanor as he spoke. The information he provided directly contradicted his earlier statements. He confessed that he hadn't originally intended to harm Javier, but after she refused to reconcile and ended their relationship for good, he made a choice he never planned to take back. He tricked her by claiming he had found her lost dog. Trusting him and unaware of what was about to happen, she agreed to meet him. He stated that the crime occurred late at night on a deserted highway. He stopped under the false pretense of looking for a missed suitcase that he claimed had fallen from the trunk. When Javier got out of the truck, he struck her with a fatal blow. Afterwards, he drove further into the desert, dug a shallow grave, and buried her body, thinking that the harsh environment would eliminate all evidence. The day after his confession, investigators began searching for the burial site using the coordinates given by Andres. In mid-January 2024, they found human remains in a shallow grave covered with sand. Now, forensic specialists begin the identification process. A few days later, forensic tests confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Javiera Jimenez. Although the search had ended, the fight for justice was just beginning. His family urged the court to impose the harshest sentence possible on Andres. After his confession, the case was brought to court. There was no doubt about his guilt. His own words, along with the evidence and the discovery of Javier's body, made that clear. It was now the court's responsibility to decide his punishment. Javier's family insists on the harshest penalty, life in prison without parole. They were convinced that he posed a threat to society. For Javiera's mother, true justice guaranteed Andres will never have the chance to re-offend. The prosecution presented all relevant evidence in court, with experts confirming that the crime was premeditated. They highlighted the misleading invitation, the choice to take her to a remote area, and the complete absence of any effort to help her, all of which indicated a well-planned act. Forensic specialists documented injuries that disproved any claims of accidental harm. Nevertheless, the defense sought a lighter sentence, arguing that their client had confessed, volunteered, and aided in locating the remains, which they claimed to have cooperated with the investigation. They requested leniency based on this argument, which angered Javier's family. They believed it was clear that Andres's confession was not out of remorse. He only admitted the truth when he had no other choice. He felt no guilt and was merely trying to lessen his sentence. The trial lasted several weeks, during which Gladys participated every session, watching everything unfold. Although she remains composed, her determination was evident in her eyes. Furthermore, In a similar fashion to the disappearance of Javiera Jimenez in August 2022, Andres is also being investigated for being a member of a violent armed gang that steals copper while it is being transported on FCAB trains. Similar crimes were committed by other members of the gang, and the prosecution was able to establish Andres Sutter's involvement through photographs, text messages, and statements from other criminals. In both cases, the court set different investigation dates. For the murder, he was sentenced to 90 days, and for the armed robbery and the copper cathode theft, he was sentenced to 60 days. In addition, Andres remains in custody awaiting trial. Bree Kristen Kuhn was born in May 1987 in the United States and grew up with her parents and her older brother, Eric. The family lived in Pennsylvania until her parents divorced. Following the divorce, Bree and Eric moved to Texas with their mother, whose name has not been disclosed. When Eric entered 9th grade, Bree left Texas to live with their father in New York. At that time, their father was in a new relationship with a woman named Karen. Though Bree and her brother Eric lived apart, they remained close, staying in touch on important occasions. However, their relationship with their mother became strained over time. According to Eric, their mother was physically abusive, and Bree would often defend him. She took on the role of a protector, enduring the abuse herself to keep her brother safe. These traumatic experiences profoundly affected Bree, leading her to struggle with depression and anxiety throughout her adolescence. By the age of 13, she had attempted to end her life. In the face of adversity, Bree focused on her education, attending 2 community colleges. While still young, she enlisted in the U.S. Navy, where she served for 17 years at various naval stations across the country. In 2009, she welcomed her first child, a daughter named Kay, with her then partner, James. Although their relationship ended, Bree retained custody of Kay, while James was granted weekend visitation rights. She later began a relationship with Colin Turner, a fellow service member in the military. Colin James Turner, born on December 28, 1987, was raised in a close-knit, religious family alongside his parents, Tierva Donald Turner, and his sisters, Nicole and Rebecca. Known for his warmth and strong family values, Colin served in the Marine Corps with a specialization in explosive ordnance disposal. He married Casey Gatzman in 2009, and they had a son that same year. After the separation, custody of the children went to Casey, but Colin remained actively involved in his son's care and life. On May 29, 2016, Colin married Bree, and together they started a family with Bree's daughter, Kay. Colin embraced the role of Kay's father, treating her as his own, which deeply endeared her to his family. In April 2017, Bree and Colin welcomed their son, John Patrick, followed by their daughter, Lonnie, in August 2018. After 14 years of service, Colin retired from the Marines and began studying electrical engineering at Arizona State University. He also managed to balance his studies with his responsibilities as a parent, such as helping Kay with distance learning. By this time, the family had settled in Gulf Breeze, Florida, a community recognized for its safety and family-friendly environment. Despite outward appearances of stability, underlying issues were present in Bree and Colin's relationship. She confided to her brother, Eric, that her relationship with Colin was strained. When Eric visited to help mediate, Colin reportedly joked, both privately and in front of Bree, that they got along because they were both narcissistic psychopaths. Eric also noticed Bree felt burdened as the family's sole financial provider, while Colin focused on his studies and childcare. Although Eric encouraged Bree to leave the relationship, she hesitated. Her concerns include that Colin could use her mental health history and his family's finances to gain a legal advantage in a custody battle. In April 2021, she attempted to end her life by overdosing on pills and alcohol while speaking on the phone with Eric. Panicked, Eric contacted Colin, who was at home with Bree but reportedly did not help her. He ultimately called emergency services, and she was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility for 10 days. A month later, she returned to the facility for another week. During her recovery, Bree attributed much of her emotional distress to job-related stress and accused Colin of interfering with her work, which she said exacerbated her difficulties. However, she never publicly accused him of psychological, physical, or emotional abuse. After her hospitalization, she joined an intensive outpatient program and resumed her career at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola. In her role as an assistant to the command chief, Bree was able to continue her treatment while serving under limited-duty sailor status. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Bree began seeking legal assistance. On Wednesday, September 8, 2021, she reached out to a group of mothers on a messaging app, asking for recommendations for a lawyer. She mentioned that the situation could escalate, as it involved disputes over children and property. At 12:53 p.m. that same day, Bree called 911 to report a domestic dispute with her husband, Colin, and requested police assistance at their home. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived at the scene. Colin, her husband, was calmly sitting in a beach chair at the end of the driveway. He informed the officers that Bree had a shotgun, a pistol in the bedroom, and admitted that he also had a firearm in his truck. Colin emphasized that Bree was the one who had called the police. When the officers asked about her whereabouts, he led one of them to the home's entrance and pointed toward the kitchen. As the officer entered, Bree's young son approached, curiously asking about the officer's equipment. Shortly afterward, Bree appeared, looking visibly frustrated. The police officer explained that they could not intervene immediately unless there were obvious injuries or specific evidence of violence. Bree responded bitterly, sarcastically stating that she would make things clearer next time. The officer attempted to de-escalate the situation, explaining that without a court order or restraining order, they could not prevent Colin from seeing or taking the children, especially since 2 of them were biologically his. When asked if she wanted to file a formal complaint, she declined, saying she just wanted to leave the house with her children. The officer informed her that he would speak to Colin while she gathered her belongings. While the officers were speaking with Colin, Bree began transferring items from Colin's truck to hers. Noticing this, Colin firmly stated that he would not allow her to take the children. He argued that he was their primary caregiver and claimed that he intended to take them to his parents' home in Georgia for a few days to let tensions cool down. He also denied having any intention of keeping the children away from Bree. One of the officers advised Colin that, as long as no violence was involved, parenting disputes were not matters for police intervention. When asked if he wanted to file a formal report, he agreed. The officers retrieved paperwork from their patrol vehicle and provided forms to both parties. When Bree saw her form, she asked what she should do if her husband hit her after they left. The officer advised her to use her phone's camera to document any evidence. The officers then departed. A few hours later, around 5 p.m., there was another 911 call from their home, this time from Colin. When the police arrived again, they found Colin outside, holding the youngest child. He told the officers that Bree was refusing to let him back into the house. She then went outside and tried to take the child from his arms. The officers intervened and asked Bree to go back inside to allow for a calm discussion. After confirming that Colin lived in and co-owned the house, an officer informed him that he had the legal right to enter the property, though they discouraged him from using force. The officer emphasized that Colin's access to the home was a lawful right. Concerned about another confrontation, he requested that the officer accompany him inside. Colin explained that Bree had attempted to take the child into the house, but the child had started screaming, refusing to go in without him. When the officer asked if any physical conflict had occurred, Colin said no, but mentioned that the situation was part of a long-standing dispute that had lasted for years. Bree, on the other hand, told the officers that they were discussing divorce and claimed Colin intended to take the children to Georgia. She further accused him of being physically aggressive, adding that the earlier police visit had failed to protect her. She also alleged that Colin had contacted her superiors at work and possibly made claims of emotional abuse. The officer reiterated to Bree that she could not legally prevent Colin from entering his own home. He suggested they work out a temporary arrangement, such as staying in separate bedrooms and minimizing contact, for the well-being of their children. However, Bree refused, expressing concern that allowing Colin inside could lead to more violence. She again brought up her previous allegations of abuse and expressed fear of being harmed. The officer advised her to document any future incidents, but it was clear Bree was seeking more than just advice. She wanted protection that the current system was not equipped to provide. When the officer suggested that everyone enter the house together, Bree refused. The officer then turned to Colin, who calmly provided the children's information. During the exchange, he mentioned Bree's mental health issues. Police confirmed this and said that he had previously intervened in an incident at their home in March, when Bree attempted to harm herself. Police reminded Colin of the same advice they had previously given him, to remain separated within the home for the safety of everyone involved. He also pointed out that standing outside in the intense heat with a small child amidst biting mosquitoes was unsustainable. Before heading inside again, Colin asked the officer to retrieve his wallet, which Bree had allegedly taken from his vehicle. At the door, Bree met the officer. When asked about the wallet, she denied having it and claimed she had only taken Colin's credit card. The officer reminded her that a wallet is personal property, not something to be shared in marriage, and instructed her to return it if she had taken it. In a calm but firm tone, the officer told Bree she had to allow Colin and their daughter back into the house. Bree agreed, but only on the condition that Colin would not harass her or the children. The officer reassured her that if anything happened, she could call them again. As the officer prepared to leave, he returned to inform Colin that Bree claimed she did not know where the wallet was. Colin just smiled and implied that he would let the matter slide. But in reality, nothing was resolved satisfactorily. Less than 2 hours later, at exactly 6:22 p.m., a third and final 911 call came from their residence. Colin James Turner, just 33 years old, had been fatally shot. The final fatal gunshot rang out while the 911 operator was still on the line. On the porch, officers found Bree, then 34, sitting calmly. As they approached, she spontaneously confessed that she had shot her husband. She was taken into custody without resistance. When asked about the children, she said she had taken them to a neighbor who lived a few houses down. Paramedics checked her over while officers ensured that she was physically stable. When asked if she could breathe properly or needed medical care, she didn't respond, so emergency personnel were instructed to evaluate her. Bree was brought to the police station for questioning. The interrogation was slow, interrupted by long silences and frequent bouts of crying. During the interview, Bree opened up about the state of her marital relationship. She said Colin was the primary caregiver for their children and admitted that she believed she had little chance of winning custody due to her history of mental health struggles. She revealed that Colin had threatened to take the children to Georgia and had physically assaulted her. He had also warned that if she reported him, no one would believe her because of her mental health issues, calling her crazy. Bree confessed that she had removed the batteries from the garage door opener to stop Colin from leaving with the children. She claimed that Colin only pretended to care about her mental health as a way to manipulate her, especially after she decided to file for divorce. She mentioned that she had a legal appointment scheduled for the next day. She also mentioned that she had an appointment with a lawyer scheduled for the next day. When asked what had happened just before the attack, Bree said her memory after the second police visit was hazy. She recalled Colin attempting to enter the house through the garage but failing because the way was blocked. However, she said he then used a side door to enter the house. She claimed she tried to stop him, but her next clear memory was knocking on a neighbor's door. She remembered leaving her children there to ensure their safety before returning home to help her husband. Investigators pressed her for a more comprehensive account, but she could only provide scattered details. She said she returned to the garage and saw blood everywhere. Throughout the questioning, Bree repeatedly asked to call her father. Eventually, she was allowed to make the call, which lasted 18 minutes and consisted mostly of sobbing. Her father tried to comfort her, suggesting she would likely spend the night in jail and urging her to seek help if she felt like harming herself again. He reassured her that things could improve and told her to stay strong and look for hope. Toward the end of the call, Bree asked if her father could take custody of her two youngest children. He didn't give a definitive answer, suggesting instead that they would need to discuss it with Colin's mother. He also advised her to cooperate with a public defender if necessary until a more suitable legal option became available. At the end of the call, Bree painfully confesses, she doesn't know what's worse, knowing that Colin is dead or realizing that she was the one who killed him. A month later, in early October 2021, Bree was indicted by a Santa Rosa County grand jury for first-degree premeditated murder in connection to the death of her husband, Colin. Prosecutors had not yet decided whether to seek life imprisonment or the death penalty. On October 16, Colin's family and friends gathered for a military funeral to honor his 14 years of service in the U.S. Marine Corps. During the ceremony, the American flag symbolizing his service was presented to his eldest son, Brody Turner. The youngest children of his were adopted by his parents, who always strived to love and support him despite enduring an irreparable loss. After 3 years of delays, Bree's long-awaited trial began on Tuesday, September 24, 2024, at the Santa Rosa County Courthouse. Now 37 years old, Bree faced accusations of committing a premeditated and calculated act of murder. The prosecution carefully outlined the events of September 8, 2021, arguing that Bree intentionally killed her husband following a day of escalating conflict. Meanwhile, the defense presented a drastically different narrative, asserting that Bree was a victim of battered woman syndrome. They argued that she had endured years of psychological and emotional abuse from Colin, who had become increasingly unstable after suffering a traumatic brain injury during his military service. The defense maintained that he posed a significant threat to her and their children. Over 4 days, the court heard testimony from various witnesses. The jury and those in the courtroom reviewed full body cam footage from responding officers, which captured their interactions on the day of the incident. The recordings revealed Bree's sarcasm, Colin's calm demeanor, and the chilling 911 call during which gunshots were recorded in real time. Every officer involved testified, including one officer who described the crime scene in detail, recounting the sight of the garage, blood, Colin's body slumped in a chair, and a holstered weapon nearby. A crime scene analyst presented a series of photographs to help jurors visualize where Colin's body was found. Evidence collected included shell casings, bullet fragments, and Colin's phone, which was still connected to the 911 operator, lying beneath him. Prescriptions for Bree's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and mental health treatment were submitted as evidence, along with testimony from her supervisor, Craig Forum, from the Pensacola Naval Station. Craig explained that Bree had been placed on limited duty due to mental health issues. He said that on the day of the shooting, Bree did not show up for work, and Colin called him to inform him that Bree had cut off the family's financial access and damaged the electronics in the house. Colin also told Craig that she had missed therapy sessions and that he was considering moving the children to Georgia. Craig testified that Colin remained calm and spoke in a composed manner throughout the call. He also provided Colin with contact information for a family counselor. Soon after, he spoke to Bree, who accused her husband of lying and being unreasonable in taking the children away. On the trial's second day, forensic pathologist Dr. Diana Oleski was called to testify for the prosecution. Although she did not personally perform Colin's autopsy, she reviewed the results and formed her conclusion. The autopsy revealed that Colin had been shot 4 times, all from behind. The bullets entered between his shoulders and chest. One particularly devastating shot passed through his left shoulder, exited the side of his neck, and lodged in his right wrist. The injuries caused extensive trauma, including punctured lungs, fractured ribs, damage to cervical vertebrae, a ruptured spleen, spinal cord injuries, and damage to the pericardium, the heart's protective membrane. Diana concluded that Colin would have survived for only a few minutes following the pericardial injury. When the defense attorney asked if there was any evidence to indicate that Colin's arm was broken, since he had claimed during the 911 call that Bree had tried to break his arm, Diana responded that there were no signs of injuries consistent with that statement. Eric, Bree's brother, was the next to testify. He recounted a phone conversation with Bree months earlier, on the day she attempted to end her life. During that call, she told him she had taken pills mixed with alcohol. Eric stated that when he informed Colin of this, Colin showed no concern and took no action to help, prompting Eric to step in and call for assistance. Eric also mentioned that Bree had always feared losing her children, believing Colin's family's wealth and legal resources would work against her. On the day of the attack, Eric said Bree was especially anxious because she had an upcoming surgery and feared that Colin would use that time to take the children. He recalled speaking to Bree several times that day, noting her mood alternated between calm and distressed. During their final 45-minute call, Eric said he overheard Bree arguing with Colin, followed by shouting and the sound of objects being thrown. He claimed that Bree had then picked up a weapon. When asked how Eric knew this, he hesitated, saying he believed Bree had told him. Eric begged her to leave with the children, but she didn't listen. The call ended with Bree saying that she was not going to take the kids, followed by the sound of gunshots, crying children, and Bree repeatedly saying that she had killed him and that she needed to call the police. However, Eric's testimony was inconsistent under cross-examination. His account differed from his initial statements to detectives in Pennsylvania. He attributed these contradictions to the claim that his first interview had not been recorded, a claim the detective denied. With that, the prosecution rested its case. The defense initially planned to present Bree's defense through testimony from a mental health expert and Bree herself to explain battered woman syndrome. However, they unexpectedly changed strategy, opting not to present these testimonies and offering no public explanation for their decision. Instead, the defense called James, Bree's ex-husband and the father of her eldest daughter, Kay. James testified about the incident on the day of the shooting. He stated that he exchanged text messages with Colin and later received a phone call from Bree. During the call, Bree had told him that he needed to come get Kay and that she had just shot Colin. When he had asked why, she had responded that she didn't know. James immediately went to pick up his daughter. James also testified in court that he had always thought highly of Colin as a stepfather and that Kay had spoken positively about him. On the third day of the trial, proceedings were interrupted by a hurricane warning, delaying closing arguments until Friday, September 27th. During the prosecution's closing argument, they emphasized that Bree showed no visible injuries on the day of the shooting. They argued that Bree deliberately provoked Colin, secretly filmed the confrontation on her phone, and kept her brother on the line during the incident. They contended that her motive was not self-defense but a desire to assert control. The prosecution concluded that, being unable to provoke aggression from Colin, Bree attacked him 4 times in the back without realizing he was on a 911 call. The defense argued that Colin had been walking around the house with a firearm and suggested he hid the weapon in his truck before police arrived. They referenced Colin's 911 call, where he claimed Bree tried to break his arm, a claim contradicted by the autopsy. One of the defense attorneys mocked Colin's actions during the call, asserting that, as a Marine, he should have handled the situation differently, further implying that his response would have been ridiculed by others in his military unit. The defense ultimately claimed that Bree resorted to attacking Colin because law enforcement had repeatedly failed to protect her despite her pleas for help. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. During the sentencing hearing, the judge allowed Colin's parents to speak about the impact of the incident. Colin's mother expressed gratitude for having custody of her grandchildren and stated her intent to adopt them. She condemned Bree not only for taking her son's life but also for attempting to tarnish his reputation. Colin's father spoke of his sadness and disappointment in Bree's actions, sharing that the children were doing well in school and surrounded by love. The judge then sentenced Bree Kristen Kuhn to life in prison. Although the verdict has been announced, the case is not over yet. On October 3, 2024, Bree's legal team filed an appeal with the Florida Court of Appeals, challenging her conviction and requesting a new trial. Meanwhile, Bree was discharged from the U.S. Navy with a general discharge under honorable conditions after 17 years of service, thus avoiding further military disciplinary action. Sharon Parker was born and raised in Florida, USA, in a family with several siblings, including 2 older brothers and an older sister. From a young age, she was very active, often attending concerts and participating in social events with her friends. Known for her stylish appearance, she always looked great. In 1976, at the age of 19, Sharon became pregnant and married her longtime boyfriend, whom she had known since school. Their relationship appeared loving and had stood the test of time. After their wedding, they moved to Alabama for her husband's job, where Sharon gave birth to a daughter named Heather. Excited about motherhood, Sharon was eager to be the best mother possible, but her husband did not share her enthusiasm. After Heather's birth, their marriage began to deteriorate. Her husband struggled with the changes, feeling jealous of the time Sharon spent caring for their baby. This ultimately led to their divorce 3 years later. Sharon returned to Florida with Heather, where her family lived. She settled in Fort Myers, close to them, and focused on raising her daughter while working. The father was largely indifferent to the child, so Sharon tried to compensate for the shortcomings in her daughter's life. Initially, Sharon found work as an assistant accountant at a local hospital. Realizing she needed support, she sought a new partner who could be a father figure for Heather and help her have more children. This hope came to fruition when her mother introduced her to Gary Parker, a builder who was studying to become an engineer. Sharon felt an instant connection, describing it as love at first sight. They quickly began a romantic relationship and married a few months later. A year after their wedding, Sharon became pregnant again and gave birth to twin boys, Jacob and Joshua. By that time, Heather was older and eagerly participated in taking care of her brothers, feeling proud to be an older sister and helping with their upbringing, especially when their mother was busy. The Parkers were a happy family. Gary is a good man. He always takes care of his wife's daughter and creates a loving environment for her. After the birth of their twins, Jacob and Joshua, their bond grew even stronger. They seemed to have the perfect family, enjoying barbecues on Sundays and camping in their backyard. It appeared as though they had a bright future ahead, filled with the joys of aging together and raising grandchildren. Unfortunately, their dreams would not come to fruition. Sharon was an excellent mother and a lively young wife who brought warmth and support to the family. As a homemaker, she managed the household while Gary worked to provide for them. They hadn't planned on having more children, but in the fall of 1989, Sharon announced that she was pregnant. They were overjoyed and eagerly anticipated the arrival of their new baby. On March 19, 1990, they welcomed a daughter named Julie. Sharon was thrilled, and Gary shared in her excitement. 10 days after Julie was born, the family planned a big celebration for their relatives and close friends. A large sign hung outside their house to announce that they had had another daughter. By this time, Jacob and Joshua were 6 years old, and Heather was already a high school student. Guests were expected to arrive on the evening of March 29, 1990. As usual, Gary and Sharon woke up that morning, took the kids to school, then Gary went to work while Sharon prepared for the party and cared for Julie. Jacob and Joshua were excited about the evening's events. Once their classes ended, they hurried home. However, as they approached the house, they found it unusually dark inside. Upon entering, they were met with an eerie silence. Their mother, Sharon, always greeted them at this time, often standing by the window to watch for them. She would help them take off their coats as part of their daily routine. So, when she didn't come out to greet them, the boys grew concerned. Initially, they thought she might be unwell and called for her, but there was no response. The boys began searching the house, and one of them soon spotted Sharon sitting motionless in a dark room. He called her name, but she remained silent. As they got closer, they touched her head, causing her to fall to the side. They saw that the right side of her head and face was covered in blood. Alarmed, they called for their baby sister, Julie, but she was nowhere to be found. Feeling distressed, the boys ran out onto the porch, uncertain about what to do next. Around the same time, 14-year-old Heather arrived home from school. She sensed that something was wrong when she saw her frightened twin brothers crying on the porch. They told her that their mother was in the house and hurt. Heather quickly went inside and was horrified to find Sharon, 33, lifeless in a chair with dried blood on her head. Frantically, Heather searched for Julie, but the baby was not there. Confused and panicked, she tried to call emergency services, but the home phone was disconnected. Leaving her brothers on the porch with instructions to stay put, she ran to a neighbor's house to call for help. Initially doubtful, the neighbor ultimately called the police. Soon after, several police cars arrived at their home and began investigating the scene. After Heather called the police, she contacted Gary. He asked for time off from work and went home. Investigators found that the locks and windows were undamaged, suggesting that either Sharon knew her attacker and let them in willingly or that the attacker had a key. Sharon was attacked from behind at close range. The scene was particularly chilling, with her sitting in a chair, her legs crossed and her hands resting on her knees, making it appear as though she was conversing with someone. This posed position suggested that the murderer may have staged it intentionally. There were no signs of a struggle. It was clear that Sharon did not anticipate being shot, as she was facing away from the attacker. An additional concern was the disappearance of her baby, Julie, who had been born just 10 days before the murder. Forensic experts searched the crime scene quickly, knowing that time was of the essence. Every minute that passed increased the urgency to issue media announcements regarding the baby's whereabouts. Unfortunately, they only had a photograph of Julie to share with the public and authorities. When Gary returned to the house, he assisted the police in identifying any missing items. Strangely, they noticed that the holiday poster on the front of the house was gone. Apart from the poster and Julie, nothing of value was taken, even Sharon's wallet was left untouched. This indicated that the murder was not a robbery. The Parker family is known for their kindness and friendliness, with no known enemies or criminal associations. They had no debts or problems, and it did not appear to be a random attack. It seemed to be motivated by personal reasons. The news of Sharon's murder deeply affected the twins, Jacob and Joshua. Until the last moment, they were hopeful that their mother was simply sick and would soon be released from the hospital. During this difficult time, the families of Sharon and Gary came together to support one another and seek justice. To gather more information, the police interviewed the closest neighbors of Sharon and Gary. A neighbor reported seeing a red pickup truck parked near Sharon's garage just before Jacob and Joshua returned home from school. She noticed that the truck was unfamiliar and appeared shabby, though she could not see the license plate. The neighbor then witnessed a woman getting out of the faded red car, carrying a grocery bag. The woman entered Sharon's house calmly, but her face was obscured by a scarf and sunglasses, making the creation of a composite sketch ineffective. This was the only lead the police had, and with no surveillance cameras in the area, it provided little assistance to the investigation. However, they managed to create a basic description of the white, dark-haired woman, which was quickly shared with the media. To gather more details, they used a poster designed for a holiday event. It was essential to talk to those close to Sharon and Gary, as the woman might have been part of a larger criminal scheme. Therefore, detectives were cautious about releasing Gary. He denied any involvement in his wife's murder, and there was no evidence to suggest he had a motive or opportunity, given that he was at work during the incident. Furthermore, Gary cooperated fully with the investigation and did not exhibit any suspicious behavior. Detectives discovered that Gary had a working relationship with a woman named Stephanie. They had taken several business trips together. Gary mentioned that just before the birth of their daughter, Stephanie seemed to become more involved with his family, behaving normally around his wife. Gary recalled that Stephanie visited their home a few days after Sharon was discharged from the hospital. On that day, their eldest daughter, Heather, expressed her dislike for Stephanie's presence, finding it suspicious. The adults dismissed Heather's concerns since she was only 14, but the police found her comment noteworthy. Is it possible that Stephanie kidnapped Julie out of jealousy? Although Gary and Stephanie worked closely together, they insisted there was no romantic involvement. Suspicion arose when a neighbor reported seeing her enter Gary's home, prompting detectives to investigate further. They interviewed Stephanie at the station. She appeared innocent and claimed she was with Gary in the office during the attack. Gary provided a detailed account of his activities on the day of Sharon's death, stating he was working until he received an urgent call from Heather. Witnesses indicated that there were no issues in Gary and Sharon's marriage. Gary described their relationship as harmonious and expressed happiness with their new baby. However, the police questioned why Gary owned the gun for self-defense. This gun was subjected to ballistic testing and did not match the murder weapon. Nevertheless, Gary remained a person of interest in the case. The interrogation lasted about 3 hours and did not raise any alarms. Experts determined that the only injury on Sharon was a gunshot wound to the head, indicating she was killed at close range. No DNA belonging to the killer was found under her fingernails. Meanwhile, a sketch of the suspect, based on a neighbor's description, was widely circulated in the media, resulting in around 100 tips to the police, most of which were deemed unreliable. However, one tip stood out. A woman named Peggy Mason came to the station, confidently claiming to know the identity of the perpetrator based on the police sketch. According to Peggy, she worked as a waitress at a restaurant with a coworker named Craig Kirk, who had a wife named Betty. She recalled that the day before the crime, on March 28, Craig happily told her that Betty was pregnant and could give birth soon. He mentioned this but couldn't provide an exact date for the birth. The day after the tragedy involving Sharon, Craig and Betty had a child together. This could have been a coincidence, but there were many odd details that made Peggy suspicious. A week before the supposed birth, Peggy had seen Betty in the restaurant and noticed that she didn't appear to be pregnant. Her belly seemed fake. By that time, her pregnancy should have exceeded 43 weeks, yet she seemed to be enjoying herself without going to the hospital to induce labor, which seemed strange. When Peggy mentioned these concerns to Craig, he shrugged them off, citing rare cases where pregnancies can behave unusually. However, Peggy felt he was not being truthful. Right after Sharon's murder, Craig and Betty celebrated the birth of their baby, and Peggy, having been invited, attended the party. She was surprised at how quickly Betty and the newborn were discharged from the hospital and returned to normal life. Betty seemed at ease, almost as if she hadn't just given birth. As a mother of 3 herself, Peggy doubted that the child had been born just a day earlier. However, it was hard to confirm her suspicions since Betty kept the baby at a distance from the guests, refusing to show her and attributing her behavior to postpartum depression and medication. Towards the end of the party, Peggy managed to get close enough to the baby to inspect her more closely. She noticed that the baby had short hair, as if it had already been shaved, and the baby did not resemble either of its parents, Betty or Craig. When Peggy shared her suspicions with Betty, the woman became angry and quickly sent all the guests away, particularly upset with Peggy. She questioned where a newborn could come from. After seeing the sketch in the media and hearing about what happened to Sharon, Peggy began to connect the dots and suspected that Betty or Craig might be involved in the case. The detectives became interested in this new lead and decided to investigate Betty. She was previously unknown to the police, having been born in Florida on November 7, 1950. In her first marriage, she had 2 children, but her husband was very abusive. Betty escaped his control, filed for divorce, and gained sole custody of her kids. Unfortunately, she faced many challenges. In 1981, she lost custody of her sons due to her difficult financial situation, and the authorities placed them in foster care. Craig met Betty in 1982, and the year later, they began dating and eventually got married. However, despite their efforts, they remained in poverty and struggled to find happiness. Relatives and friends described their lives as a constant battle for survival. Craig worked long hours in a restaurant, and Betty attempted to find work, but she had dropped out of school due to an early pregnancy, which made it hard for her to secure a good job. They lacked stability and prosperity, but both tried hard to improve their situation. Betty desperately wanted to become a mother. She loved Craig and hoped they could have a child together, but despite trying for many years and even seeking medical help, they were unsuccessful. To fulfill her longing for motherhood, Betty worked in various child-related jobs, such as being a Girl Scout leader and performing as a clown at children's events. During this time, she had a minor legal issue when she forged a check, but she quickly resolved it by paying restitution, which meant there was no official record of the offense. For some time, it seemed that Betty and Craig had accepted that they might never become parents. However, Betty was increasingly anxious about possibly losing Craig to a younger woman who could have children. At the end of the year, she surprised her husband and friends with the exciting news that she was finally pregnant. Betty appeared to be pregnant, as her belly was growing. On the evening of March 29th, she returned home with a girl she named Laura. This seemed unusual because she had been discharged from the hospital right after giving birth. Now their family had grown to 3, and they shared their happy news with loved ones. Detectives went to the restaurant where Craig worked, but he was off that day. They found his home address and went to check if he was there. When Craig opened the door, he was visibly intoxicated and struggled to stay upright. He was confused about why the detectives had come to his home. The house was chaotic and unsanitary. The only clear thing Craig could communicate was that they had recently had a baby. He claimed he was celebrating this event, which was why he was drunk. Betty and baby Laura were also present. Betty confirmed that she had just become a mother and had returned from the medical center a few days prior. She stated that the baby was born in a hospital and that they were discharged immediately due to no complications. However, when questioned, she had difficulty remembering the name and address of the hospital. She eventually said it was a hospital on Michigan Avenue, but the detectives' investigation revealed that there was no maternity ward there. Additionally, she could not present a birth certificate, claiming it was lost in the mess around them. When investigators examined the baby, they noticed that the child did not resemble either Craig or Betty. Despite these inconsistencies, the detectives decided against detaining Craig and Betty, as they wished to handle the situation delicately to avoid escalating tensions. Meanwhile, an unmarked car, driven by a woman possibly connected to the situation, left the house while the police were merely observing the family. Shortly after the police left, Betty began causing trouble by carrying and packing items from the house and loading large boxes into her car. Investigators identified a faded red pickup truck that matched the description provided by a neighbor. Betty then got into the car and drove off, with detectives following her at a distance. They eventually decided to pull her over and inspect the vehicle. Inside, they found numerous boxes but no sign of the child. The detectives returned to Betty's home, where they discovered that the baby was with Craig. They considered this a danger to the child's safety and called in Child Protective Services to have the child taken away. Fortunately, the child was unharmed and was quickly taken to the hospital, where an examination confirmed her well-being. Meanwhile, Craig was brought in for questioning. He was surprised by the situation, expressing disbelief about the events. He claimed to have no knowledge of Sharon's case and believed that Betty couldn't be pregnant by him since their relationship had deteriorated and they hadn't been intimate for years. Craig thought his wife might have had an affair but had accepted the idea of her pregnancy and the baby. However, the investigation revealed a more troubling scenario. Craig possessed a pistol that was taken for analysis because the authorities suspected it might be the weapon used to kill Sharon. Despite this, ballistic tests did not confirm its involvement. Craig provided a crucial lead, mentioning that Betty owned a similar pistol of the same caliber, which was never found, suggesting it had been disposed of by her. After hours of questioning, Craig seemed to genuinely believe that his wife was pregnant with another man's child and showed little interest in knowing more. Medical tests later confirmed that the child was Julie, the kidnapped daughter of Sharon and Gary. During her interrogation, Betty was asked if she recognized Sharon Parker. She replied that she had seen Sharon on television and then confessed to killing Sharon. Betty met Sharon and her twins, Jacob and Joshua, while enjoying a day at the mall. They struck up a conversation, and during their chat, Betty revealed that she had recently experienced a miscarriage, a shared concern that connected her to Sharon. Betty mentioned that she was pregnant again and was seeking support. The police confirmed that Betty had indeed become pregnant in early 1989 but had suffered a miscarriage shortly after, which was likely devastating for her. Her marriage was struggling, and she was desperately trying to keep her husband, motivated by a strong desire for a child. Feeling a bond, they exchanged phone numbers before parting ways. Later, Betty learned that Sharon had given birth to a baby girl. At that time, newspapers published the names of newborns, including the parents' contact information, making it easy for friends and family to send congratulations. This information helped Betty locate the Parkers' residence. She claimed she simply wanted to visit Sharon and congratulate her on the arrival of her new baby. When Betty arrived, Sharon recognized her and expressed joy. She handed Betty some money to buy groceries, which is why a neighbor saw Betty carrying a grocery bag near Sharon's house. However, when Betty entered the home and handed Sharon the groceries, the gun she carried for self-defense accidentally discharged, killing Sharon instantly. Betty stated she was in shock and initially considered fleeing but couldn't abandon the baby out of concern for the child's safety. She decided to take the baby with her, genuinely believing it was an accident and insisting that she should be released from custody. Naturally, Betty was arrested. Her account did not align with the crime scene or the reconstructed events. Soon after, she ceased cooperating with investigators and requested a lawyer. During a search of her home, authorities discovered numerous newspaper clippings featuring the names of newborns, specifically girls, indicating her troubling obsession with female infants. The investigation revealed that Betty had met some of these families, frequently introducing herself to medical professionals. However, her odd behavior raised suspicions, leading some to confront her and ultimately ask her to leave. Notably, prior to Sharon's case, she had not brought a firearm, which proved critical to the tragic outcome. In 1991, Betty's trial commenced. The prosecution charged her with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Betty maintained that the shooting was an accident and declared her innocence. She attempted to portray her actions regarding the child in a positive light within her narrative, but no one believed her. After just 30 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Betty Kirk guilty and sentenced her to life in prison, though she would be eligible for parole at the age of 103. It is unlikely she will ever be free again. The baby, Julie, was returned to her father, Gary Parker, and grew up in a loving home surrounded by her siblings. Gary committed himself to raising his children well, providing them with education and parental love. Mariana Jocelyn Baltira Valenzuela was born on November 24, 1998, in the city of Ixtapan de la Sal, located in the state of Mexico. She is the older sibling of 2 children from a modest family. Fate decreed that she had to fight for her life from her first days. She was born much earlier than expected, and doctors seriously feared that the child, with a critically low weight, would not survive, which they informed her parents, Syra and Orlando. Mariana spent the first 2 months of her life in a hospital, in a special ward for premature babies. Her mother prayed day and night for her daughter's health, and her prayers were answered. The girl quickly recovered and gained weight. By the new year of 1999, she was discharged home, allowing her parents to celebrate the holiday with their daughter. Fortunately, Mariana had no external consequences of prematurity. She grew up slim and beautiful, but her health was very poor from a very early age. When Mariana was 4 years old, a second child appeared in the family, a boy. Mariana adored her younger brother and helped her parents take care of him. From the earliest age, they were very close and practically inseparable. At the age of 6, Mariana was diagnosed with epilepsy, which required her to regularly take special medications to minimize the likelihood of seizures. The prescribed drugs and constant monitoring by specialists yielded good results, allowing her to lead a relatively ordinary life, not too different from her peers. Moreover, she treated her health responsibly, following the regimen and taking the necessary medications. Mariana studied well at school, drew beautifully, and loved music. She was a very kind, open, and sincere girl. Everyone who knew her personally spoke positively about her. However, she was also modest and shy, especially in her teenage years. She had only a couple of best friends, did not go on dates, did not attend parties, and hardly interacted with boys. Mariana preferred to spend time at home with her family, with whom she had very close and warm relationships. The fragile and petite girl looked much younger than her age. At 16, she seemed no older than 13. Kind-hearted and sympathetic, Mariana always tried to help homeless animals, which she fed, treated, looked after, and then handed over to safe hands. As a high school student, she finally decided to become a veterinarian and provide professional assistance to those in need. Her parents often said that their daughter was too naive and trusting. She didn't perceive evil or danger from other people, as she herself brought only light and kindness into the world. Therefore, her father and mother were always worried that Mariana could be offended or harmed by someone taking advantage of her innocence. The area where the Baltira family lived was relatively calm. Almost everyone who lived there knew each other by sight. However, along their street, there were a large number of shops where many migrant workers worked unofficially. Some of them lived right in the shops, as most did not have their own housing, and some could not even afford to rent a room. Naturally, among these workers were individuals with extensive criminal histories. But, as long as they performed their duties properly, the shop owners usually had no complaints about them. About 50 meters from the Baltira family home was a butcher shop. The shop owner hired 4 workers, 2 locals who sold goods, 2 immigrants unloading cargo, butchered carcasses, and cleaned the store. The shop owner allowed the workers to stay on the second floor of the shop, which was an attic. As Mariana grew older, her parents began to periodically ask her to go shopping for the family, including to the aforementioned butcher shop. There she repeatedly encountered one Cruz Quintero Martínez, a worker of the landlord who lived on the second floor. She felt fear of this man just by his presence. She repeatedly told her friends and her parents that there was something sinister in his gaze that made her blood run cold. At the same time, there was nothing specific she could blame on this man since he did not approach her or attempt to contact her in any way, but merely looked at her. So her parents decided not to let their daughter go to this store anymore and went shopping for the necessities themselves. At some point, Juan Martínez committed a minor theft, resulting in the store owner's decision to fire him. After that incident, they did not hear from him for about a year. However, in early summer 2017, he returned to his former workplace, tearfully begged his former employer to rehire him, assuring him that he would work diligently. Remarkably, he was rehired and moved back into the second floor of the store. Cyrus' niece was visiting the Baltiras while Mariana and her younger brother were on summer vacation, with Orlando being the only one at work. Around 9 a.m., Syra asked her daughter to go to the local supermarket to buy breakfast. She believed her daughter was old enough to handle such a task. Moreover, the street was well lit and crowded. In her opinion, nothing bad could happen. She gave her daughter some money and asked Mariana to buy milk, eggs, and vegetables. Mariana left the house dressed in an old t-shirt and pajama pants. The store was located less than a couple of hundred meters from their house, so the round trip to get there, buy the necessary items, and return should not have taken more than half an hour. However, when an hour passed and Mariana still had not returned, her mother grew concerned, especially since Mariana's phone was left at home. With her little niece in her arms, Syra went to look for her daughter. She walked down the street to the store and asked the cashiers if they had seen a young girl in glasses. They informed her that a girl fitting her description had bought groceries a quarter of an hour ago and had left the store. Panic began to set in. Syra realized that something terrible had happened. Syra returned home, asked her son to look after his niece, and then went out to the street, where she began asking neighbors, street vendors, and passers-by if they had seen her daughter. However, it seemed as if the girl had vanished without a trace. Syra immediately reported the incident to the police and called her husband, who rushed home from work to help find their daughter. By the time the police arrived at the scene, dozens of neighbors, as well as relatives and friends of the Baltira family, had already joined the search. They called all of Mariana's acquaintances, combed the streets, and posted printed leaflets with her photographs. Initially, law enforcement officials were not particularly concerned about the situation. They asked the parents whether their daughter could have gone on a date or visited someone. Syra and Orlando insisting that their daughter would never go anywhere without informing them, especially since she had gone to the store in her home clothes and with a grocery bag, knowing she was expected back home. There were surveillance cameras installed in the area where Mariana disappeared, but almost none of them were functional. The entire day of searching yielded no results, and not a single trace of the girl was found. As night fell, anxiety and panic turned into despair. The parents realized that they would likely never see Mariana alive again. The next day, July 28th, at about 8 a.m., Mariana's parents received a call from a nearby relative, who informed them that several police cars had arrived at a butcher's shop. Without hesitation, the Baltira got ready and went to the indicated location. Law enforcement agencies did not allow them inside. But Syra and Orlando had no intention of leaving. Minutes after checking the scene, one of the police officers informed Orlando that the body of a young girl, identified as the missing Mariana, had been found on the second floor of the building, lifeless and badly mutilated. Orlando was invited inside to confirm her identity, but Syra was strongly advised against entering, as the crime scene was truly shocking. Orlando could not believe his eyes as he looked at the body lying in a puddle of blood, his daughter. His world collapsed in an instant, and he did not know how to tell his wife, who was waiting outside. Mariana had been repeatedly abused and brutally mutilated. The cause of death was massive blood loss due to a stab wound to the stomach. The perpetrator cut open her abdomen while she was still alive, leaving her to bleed to death. An expert opinion showed that her death occurred on the night of July 27th, just a few hours before the discovery of her body. Therefore, she was alive for almost 24 hours from the time of her disappearance, during which the criminal abused her until he fatally wounded her. The murder weapon, a knife intended for cutting up carcasses, was found on the floor next to her body. The body was discovered by the owner of the store when he arrived for work that morning. According to him, every last Thursday of the month was designated as cleaning day, during which he did not work. On that day, the owner was engaged in organizational matters, meetings with suppliers, and submitting reports to the tax office while his employees cleaned and disinfected the premises. When he arrived in the morning, he immediately noticed blood stains on the floor. Initially thinking that one of his employees living on the second floor had been injured, he was shocked to find bloody men's clothing, a knife, and the body of a young girl in a pool of blood. In addition, a large sum of money had gone missing from the cash register, which the criminal had evidently taken upon fleeing. Two men who lived and worked at the store immediately came under suspicion. However, one of them showed up for work an hour later, appearing just as shocked as everyone else. He explained that he had to return home to another city urgently, and his colleague, Juan, said Juan would cover for him and clean the store himself. The police concluded that this man was telling the truth, noting that there were no traces of him at the crime scene, and he was excluded from the list of suspects. By that time, CCTV footage from the supermarket, which Mariana had visited on the last day of her life, was obtained. The footage showed she entering the store, followed by one a few minutes later, the man who worked at the butcher's shop and had instilled genuine fear in Mariana. He stalked his victim like a wild animal hunting prey, following her out of the supermarket without purchasing anything. After that, both of their trails vanished. Reconstructing the sequence of events outside the store proved impossible. Although there were cameras on the street, they were non-functional, and none of the numerous passers-by or street sellers reported anything suspicious. Mariana's parents were convinced that their daughter would never have gone with this man, no matter how he might have lured her. They believed he had forcibly taken her to the store. However, they were left wondering why she did not scream or call for help, and why none of the many passers-by or street vendors noticed anything unusual about the situation. 27-year-old Juan Cruz Quintero Martínez was characterized as withdrawn and uncommunicative. Those who knew him said that he was a violent person with sadistic tendencies, which he displayed towards homeless animals. Previously, he had attracted the attention of the police for harassment and causing serious bodily harm. He got a job as a worker in a butcher's shop in early 2015. For a long time, according to the shop owner, there were no questions or complaints about him. Juan did his job conscientiously, but in mid-2016, he was caught stealing money and was subsequently fired. After losing his job, he returned to his parents' home, where his sick elderly mother and his sister, who took care of her, lived. For almost a year, Juan literally sat on their necks, stealing money, selling things from the house, abusing alcohol, and using illegal substances. In addition, he regularly beat his mother and sister. One day, tired of the constant bullying, his sister threatened to call the police if he did not leave the house. Juan, unwilling to deal with law enforcement again, obediently left. Since he had nowhere else to go, he asked his former employer to rehire him. The owner of the butcher shop agreed, providing him with a place to work and a roof over his head, allowing him to continue living on the second floor. It was mid-June 2017, just a month before the tragedy. Juan did his job conscientiously, but about a week later, he met Mariana, who had come of age and literally drove him crazy. She avoided him and never went to that store for shopping. Nevertheless, Juan began to follow her on the streets, discovering where she was going, what paths she was choosing. The second worker who lived with him also noticed his unhealthy interest in Mariana and even tried to joke about it, not suspecting that Juan would soon commit a crime. After Juan became the only suspect in the brutal abuse and murder of Mariana, all available resources were put into searching for him. Initially, law enforcement agencies went to his house, believing that relatives might help him escape. However, his sister insisted that he was not welcome there and that Juan knew his relatives would immediately hand him over to the police. She was not even surprised by the terrible crime her brother had committed. Moreover, she described how he had abused her elderly mother and even attacked the old woman with a knife, threatening to cut her open like a pig if he was not given money for illegal substances. The search for the killer was a priority for the police because one was extremely aggressive, violent, and dangerous to others. The money stolen from the cash register would have lasted him a long time, but no one knew how he would behave next or whether he would commit another crime after killing. Throughout the month, the search continued in the Ecatepec area and surrounding suburbs because the police believed that the criminal could not have gone far. However, time passed, and no trace of Juan was found. Soon, information about the abuse and brutal murder of Mariana reached national news, and police from across the state joined the search for the brutal criminal. Juan Martínez's photo appeared daily on television news, was printed on the front pages of newspapers, and was posted on streets all over the country with the note, "Ruthless Killer at Large." A large cash reward was announced for information about his whereabouts, as well as for assistance in his arrest, which was constantly increasing. But even this did not contribute to any progress in the case. The search for the criminal proved difficult, as he had not maintained contact with any relatives and had no friends. Additionally, Juan did not have social media pages and did not even use a mobile phone, let alone credit cards. After 6 months of unsuccessful search attempts, the reward for any information about him was increased to 500,000 Mexican pesos. Even this, however, did not help. Justice for the murder took over 2 years, finally arriving in August 2019 when her executioner was located and arrested. He was found in another state, almost 1,000 kilometers from the crime scene, when he was accidentally recognized on the street by a vigilant elderly woman. He constantly hid his face behind a hood and sunglasses, seemed suspicious to her, so she decided to report him to the police, not suspecting that he was one of Mexico's most wanted criminals. Juan was arrested right on one of the city streets, and to the surprise of law enforcement agencies, he did not even resist. He obediently held out his hands, allowing them to put handcuffs on him. The next day, after his identity was confirmed, the criminal was taken to the city of Ecatepec, where he had committed his crime. He was placed in custody in one of the city's prisons awaiting trial. In May 2022, 5 years after the tragedy, the killer and abuser was finally sentenced. Juan Martínez received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Additionally, he was ordered to pay 1 million Mexican pesos in compensation for moral damages to the family of Mariana. Mariana's parents and brother said the arrest of the killer was a huge relief to them, as he would certainly not be able to harm other girls. However, even life imprisonment and a large monetary compensation cannot erase the pain from their hearts, as their beloved daughter and sister will not return. They will have to live with this for the rest of their days. Bree Kristen Kuhn was born in May 1987 in the United States and grew up with her parents and her older brother, Eric. The family lived in Pennsylvania until her parents divorced. Following the divorce, Bree and Eric moved to Texas with their mother, whose name has not been disclosed. When Eric entered 9th grade, Bree left Texas to live with their father in New York. At that time, their father was in a new relationship with a woman named Karen. Though Bree and her brother Eric lived apart, they remained close, staying in touch on important occasions. However, their relationship with their mother became strained over time. According to Eric, their mother was physically abusive, and Bree would often defend him. She took on the role of a protector, enduring the abuse herself to keep her brother safe. These traumatic experiences profoundly affected Bree, leading her to struggle with depression and anxiety throughout her adolescence. By the age of 13, she had attempted to end her life. In the face of adversity, Bree focused on her education, attending 2 community colleges. While still young, she enlisted in the U.S. Navy, where she served for 17 years at various naval stations across the country. In 2009, she welcomed her first child, a daughter named Kay, with her then partner, James. Although their relationship ended, Bree retained custody of Kay, while James was granted weekend visitation rights. She later began a relationship with Colin Turner, a fellow service member in the military. Colin James Turner, born on December 28, 1987, was raised in a close-knit, religious family alongside his parents, Tierva Donald Turner, and his sisters, Nicole and Rebecca. Known for his warmth and strong family values, Colin served in the Marine Corps with a specialization in explosive ordnance disposal. He married Casey Gatzman in 2009, and they had a son that same year. After the separation, custody of the children went to Casey, but Colin remained actively involved in his son's care and life. On May 29, 2016, Colin married Bree, and together they started a family with Bree's daughter, Kay. Colin embraced the role of Kay's father, treating her as his own, which deeply endeared her to his family. In April 2017, Bree and Colin welcomed their son, John Patrick, followed by their daughter, Lonnie, in August 2018. After 14 years of service, Colin retired from the Marines and began studying electrical engineering at Arizona State University. He also managed to balance his studies with his responsibilities as a parent, such as helping Kay with distance learning. By this time, the family had settled in Gulf Breeze, Florida, a community recognized for its safety and family-friendly environment. Despite outward appearances of stability, underlying issues were present in Bree and Colin's relationship. She confided to her brother, Eric, that her relationship with Colin was strained. When Eric visited to help mediate, Colin reportedly joked, both privately and in front of Bree, that they got along because they were both narcissistic psychopaths. Eric also noticed Bree felt burdened as the family's sole financial provider, while Colin focused on his studies and childcare. Although Eric encouraged Bree to leave the relationship, she hesitated. Her concerns include that Colin could use her mental health history and his family's finances to gain a legal advantage in a custody battle. In April 2021, she attempted to end her life by overdosing on pills and alcohol while speaking on the phone with Eric. Panicked, Eric contacted Colin, who was at home with Bree but reportedly did not help her. He ultimately called emergency services, and she was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility for 10 days. A month later, she returned to the facility for another week. During her recovery, Bree attributed much of her emotional distress to job-related stress and accused Colin of interfering with her work, which she said exacerbated her difficulties. However, she never publicly accused him of psychological, physical, or emotional abuse. After her hospitalization, she joined an intensive outpatient program and resumed her career at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola. In her role as an assistant to the command chief, Bree was able to continue her treatment while serving under limited-duty sailor status. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Bree began seeking legal assistance. On Wednesday, September 8, 2021, she reached out to a group of mothers on a messaging app, asking for recommendations for a lawyer. She mentioned that the situation could escalate, as it involved disputes over children and property. At 12:53 p.m. that same day, Bree called 911 to report a domestic dispute with her husband, Colin, and requested police assistance at their home. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived at the scene. Colin, her husband, was calmly sitting in a beach chair at the end of the driveway. He informed the officers that Bree had a shotgun, a pistol in the bedroom, and admitted that he also had a firearm in his truck. Colin emphasized that Bree was the one who had called the police. When the officers asked about her whereabouts, he led one of them to the home's entrance and pointed toward the kitchen. As the officer entered, Bree's young son approached, curiously asking about the officer's equipment. Shortly afterward, Bree appeared, looking visibly frustrated. The police officer explained that they could not intervene immediately unless there were obvious injuries or specific evidence of violence. Bree responded bitterly, sarcastically stating that she would make things clearer next time. The officer attempted to de-escalate the situation, explaining that without a court order or restraining order, they could not prevent Colin from seeing or taking the children, especially since 2 of them were biologically his. When asked if she wanted to file a formal complaint, she declined, saying she just wanted to leave the house with her children. The officer informed her that he would speak to Colin while she gathered her belongings. While the officers were speaking with Colin, Bree began transferring items from Colin's truck to hers. Noticing this, Colin firmly stated that he would not allow her to take the children. He argued that he was their primary caregiver and claimed that he intended to take them to his parents' home in Georgia for a few days to let tensions cool down. He also denied having any intention of keeping the children away from Bree. One of the officers advised Colin that, as long as no violence was involved, parenting disputes were not matters for police intervention. When asked if he wanted to file a formal report, he agreed. The officers retrieved paperwork from their patrol vehicle and provided forms to both parties. When Bree saw her form, she asked what she should do if her husband hit her after they left. The officer advised her to use her phone's camera to document any evidence. The officers then departed. A few hours later, around 5 p.m., there was another 911 call from their home, this time from Colin. When the police arrived again, they found Colin outside, holding the youngest child. He told the officers that Bree was refusing to let him back into the house. She then went outside and tried to take the child from his arms. The officers intervened and asked Bree to go back inside to allow for a calm discussion. After confirming that Colin lived in and co-owned the house, an officer informed him that he had the legal right to enter the property, though they discouraged him from using force. The officer emphasized that Colin's access to the home was a lawful right. Concerned about another confrontation, he requested that the officer accompany him inside. Colin explained that Bree had attempted to take the child into the house, but the child had started screaming, refusing to go in without him. When the officer asked if any physical conflict had occurred, Colin said no but mentioned that the situation was part of a long-standing dispute that had lasted for years. Bree, on the other hand, told the officers that they were discussing divorce and claimed Colin intended to take the children to Georgia. She further accused him of being physically aggressive, adding that the earlier police visit had failed to protect her. She also alleged that Colin had contacted her superiors at work and possibly made claims of emotional abuse. The officer reiterated to Bree that she could not legally prevent Colin from entering his own home. He suggested they work out a temporary arrangement, such as staying in separate bedrooms and minimizing contact, for the well-being of their children. However, Bree refused, expressing concern that allowing Colin inside could lead to more violence. She again brought up her previous allegations of abuse and expressed fear of being harmed. The officer advised her to document any future incidents, but it was clear Bree was seeking more than just advice. She wanted protection that the current system was not equipped to provide. When the officer suggested that everyone enter the house together, Bree refused. The officer then turned to Colin, who calmly provided the children's information. During the exchange, he mentioned Bree's mental health issues. Police confirmed this and said that he had previously intervened in an incident at their home in March, when Bree attempted to harm herself. Police reminded Colin of the same advice they had previously given him, to remain separated within the home for the safety of everyone involved. He also pointed out that standing outside in the intense heat with a small child amidst biting mosquitoes was unsustainable. Before heading inside again, Colin asked the officer to retrieve his wallet, which Bree had allegedly taken from his vehicle. At the door, Bree met the officer. When asked about the wallet, she denied having it and claimed she had only taken Colin's credit card. The officer reminded her that a wallet is personal property, not something to be shared in marriage, and instructed her to return it if she had taken it. In a calm but firm tone, the officer told Bree she had to allow Colin and their daughter back into the house. Bree agreed, but only on the condition that Colin would not harass her or the children. The officer reassured her that if anything happened, she could call them again. As the officer prepared to leave, he returned to inform Colin that Bree claimed she did not know where the wallet was. Colin just smiled and implied that he would let the matter slide. But in reality, nothing was resolved satisfactorily. Less than 2 hours later, at exactly 6:22 p.m., a third and final 911 call came from their residence. Colin James Turner, just 33 years old, had been fatally shot. The final fatal gunshot rang out while the 911 operator was still on the line. On the porch, officers found Bree, then 34, sitting calmly. As they approached, she spontaneously confessed that she had shot her husband. She was taken into custody without resistance. When asked about the children, she said she had taken them to a neighbor who lived a few houses down. Paramedics checked her over while officers ensured that she was physically stable. When asked if she could breathe properly or needed medical care, she didn't respond, so emergency personnel were instructed to evaluate her. Bree was brought to the police station for questioning. The interrogation was slow, interrupted by long silences and frequent bouts of crying. During the interview, Bree opened up about the state of her marital relationship. She said Colin was the primary caregiver for their children and admitted that she believed she had little chance of winning custody due to her history of mental health struggles. She revealed that Colin had threatened to take the children to Georgia and had physically assaulted her. He had also warned that if she reported him, no one would believe her because of her mental health issues, calling her crazy. Bree confessed that she had removed the batteries from the garage door opener to stop Colin from leaving with the children. She claimed that Colin only pretended to care about her mental health as a way to manipulate her, especially after she decided to file for divorce. She mentioned that she had a legal appointment scheduled for the next day. She also mentioned that she had an appointment with a lawyer scheduled for the next day. When asked what had happened just before the attack, Bree said her memory after the second police visit was hazy. She recalled Colin attempting to enter the house through the garage but failing because the way was blocked. However, she said he then used a side door to enter the house. She claimed she tried to stop him, but her next clear memory was knocking on a neighbor's door. She remembered leaving her children there to ensure their safety before returning home to help her husband. Investigators pressed her for a more comprehensive account, but she could only provide scattered details. She said she returned to the garage and saw blood everywhere. Throughout the questioning, Bree repeatedly asked to call her father. Eventually, she was allowed to make the call, which lasted 18 minutes and consisted mostly of sobbing. Her father tried to comfort her, suggesting she would likely spend the night in jail and urging her to seek help if she felt like harming herself again. He reassured her that things could improve and told her to stay strong and look for hope. Toward the end of the call, Bree asked if her father could take custody of her two youngest children. He didn't give a definitive answer, suggesting instead that they would need to discuss it with Colin's mother. He also advised her to cooperate with a public defender if necessary until a more suitable legal option became available. At the end of the call, Bree painfully confesses she doesn't know what's worse, knowing that Colin is dead or realizing that she was the one who killed him. A month later, in early October 2021, Bree was indicted by a Santa Rosa County grand jury for first-degree premeditated murder in connection to the death of her husband, Colin. Prosecutors had not yet decided whether to seek life imprisonment or the death penalty. On October 16, Colin's family and friends gathered for a military funeral to honor his 14 years of service in the U.S. Marine Corps. During the ceremony, the American flag symbolizing his service was presented to his eldest son, Brody Turner. The youngest children of his were adopted by his parents, who always strived to love and support him despite enduring an irreparable loss. After 3 years of delays, Bree's long-awaited trial began on Tuesday, September 24, 2024, at the Santa Rosa County Courthouse. Now 37 years old, Bree faced accusations of committing a premeditated and calculated act of murder. The prosecution carefully outlined the events of September 8, 2021, arguing that Bree intentionally killed her husband following a day of escalating conflict. Meanwhile, the defense presented a drastically different narrative, asserting that Bree was a victim of battered woman syndrome. They argued that she had endured years of psychological and emotional abuse from Colin, who had become increasingly unstable after suffering a traumatic brain injury during his military service. The defense maintained that he posed a significant threat to her and their children. Over 4 days, the court heard testimony from various witnesses. The jury and those in the courtroom reviewed full body cam footage from responding officers, which captured their interactions on the day of the incident. The recordings revealed Bree's sarcasm, Colin's calm demeanor, and the chilling 911 call during which gunshots were recorded in real time. Every officer involved testified, including one officer who described the crime scene in detail, recounting the site of the garage, blood, Colin's body slumped in a chair, and a holstered weapon nearby. A crime scene analyst presented a series of photographs to help jurors visualize where Colin's body was found. Evidence collected included shell casings, bullet fragments, and Colin's phone, which was still connected to the 911 operator, lying beneath him. Prescriptions for Bree's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and mental health treatment were submitted as evidence, along with testimony from her supervisor, Craig Forum, from the Pensacola Naval Station. Craig explained that Bree had been placed on limited duty due to mental health issues. He said that on the day of the shooting, Bree did not show up for work, and Colin called him to inform him that Bree had cut off the family's financial access and damaged the electronics in the house. Colin also told Craig that she had missed therapy sessions and that he was considering moving the children to Georgia. Craig testified that Colin remained calm and spoke in a composed manner throughout the call. He also provided Colin with contact information for a family counselor. Soon after, he spoke to Bree, who accused her husband of lying and being unreasonable in taking the children away. On the trial's second day, forensic pathologist Dr. Diana Oleski was called to testify for the prosecution. Although she did not personally perform Colin's autopsy, she reviewed the results and formed her conclusion. The autopsy revealed that Colin had been shot 4 times, all from behind. The bullets entered between his shoulders and chest. One particularly devastating shot passed through his left shoulder, exited the side of his neck, and lodged in his right wrist. The injuries caused extensive trauma, including punctured lungs, fractured ribs, damage to cervical vertebrae, a ruptured spleen, spinal cord injuries, and damage to the pericardium, the heart's protective membrane. Diana concluded that Colin would have survived for only a few minutes following the pericardial injury. When the defense attorney asked if there was any evidence to indicate that Colin's arm was broken, since he had claimed during the 911 call that Bree had tried to break his arm, Diana responded that there were no signs of injuries consistent with that statement. Eric, Bree's brother, was the next to testify. He recounted a phone conversation with Bree months earlier, on the day she attempted to end her life. During that call, she told him she had taken pills mixed with alcohol. Eric stated that when he informed Colin of this, Colin showed no concern and took no action to help, prompting Eric to step in and call for assistance. Eric also mentioned that Bree had always feared losing her children, believing Colin's family's wealth and legal resources would work against her. On the day of the attack, Eric said Bree was especially anxious because she had an upcoming surgery and feared that Colin would use that time to take the children. He recalled speaking to Bree several times that day, noting her mood alternated between calm and distressed. During their final 45-minute call, Eric said he overheard Bree arguing with Colin, followed by shouting and the sound of objects being thrown. He claimed that Bree had then picked up a weapon. When asked how Eric knew this, he hesitated, saying he believed Bree had told him. Eric begged her to leave with the children, but she didn't listen. The call ended with Bree saying that she was not going to take the kids, followed by the sound of gunshots, crying children, and Bree repeatedly saying that she had killed him and that she needed to call the police. However, Eric's testimony was inconsistent under cross-examination. His account differed from his initial statements to detectives in Pennsylvania. He attributed these contradictions to the claim that his first interview had not been recorded, a claim the detective denied. With that, the prosecution rested its case. The defense initially planned to present Bree's defense through testimony from a mental health expert and Bree herself to explain battered woman syndrome. However, they unexpectedly changed strategy, opting not to present these testimonies and offering no public explanation for their decision. Instead, the defense called James, Bree's ex-husband and the father of her eldest daughter, Kay. James testified about the incident on the day of the shooting. He stated that he exchanged text messages with Colin and later received a phone call from Bree. During the call, Bree had told him that he needed to come get Kay and that she had just shot Colin. When he had asked why, she had responded that she didn't know. James immediately went to pick up his daughter. James also testified in court that he had always thought highly of Colin as a stepfather and that Kay had spoken positively about him. On the third day of the trial, proceedings were interrupted by a hurricane warning, delaying closing arguments until Friday, September 27th. During the prosecution's closing argument, they emphasized that Bree showed no visible injuries on the day of the shooting. They argued that Bree deliberately provoked Colin, secretly filmed the confrontation on her phone, and kept her brother on the line during the incident. They contended that her motive was not self-defense but a desire to assert control. The prosecution concluded that, being unable to provoke aggression from Colin, Bree attacked him 4 times in the back without realizing he was on a 911 call. The defense argued that Colin had been walking around the house with a firearm and suggested he hid the weapon in his truck before police arrived. They referenced Colin's 911 call, where he claimed Bree tried to break his arm, a claim contradicted by the autopsy. One of the defense attorneys mocked Colin's actions during the call, asserting that, as a Marine, he should have handled the situation differently, further implying that his response would have been ridiculed by others in his military unit. The defense ultimately claimed that Bree resorted to attacking Colin because law enforcement had repeatedly failed to protect her despite her pleas for help. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. During the sentencing hearing, the judge allowed Colin's parents to speak about the impact of the incident. Colin's mother expressed gratitude for having custody of her grandchildren and stated her intent to adopt them. She condemned Bree not only for taking her son's life but also for attempting to tarnish his reputation. Colin's father spoke of his sadness and disappointment in Bree's actions, sharing that the children were doing well in school and surrounded by love. The judge then sentenced Bree Kristen Kuhn to life in prison. Although the verdict has been announced, the case is not over yet. On October 3, 2024, Bree's legal team filed an appeal with the Florida Court of Appeals, challenging her conviction and requesting a new trial. Meanwhile, Bree was discharged from the U.S. Navy with a general discharge under honorable conditions after 17 years of service, thus avoiding further military disciplinary action.